The wasteland stretched before Lieutenant Arlen Cade, an endless sea of rust and ruin. Bands of crimson light cut through storm clouds on the horizon, painting the broken landscape in blood. He adjusted his tactical visor, scanning the coordinates once more. The dust-choked wind carried the metallic scent of an approaching storm, but Arlen paid it no mind. He had hunted far more dangerous prey in worse conditions. "Command, this is Cade. I'm approaching the target zone. Maintain calm silence unless urgent." His voice was low and measured a hunter's patience earned through years of tracking targets across the frontier. "Confirmed, Lieutenant. Remember your orders. The Blue Ghost is top priority. Capture preferred, termination authorized." Arlen's mouth tightened at the reminder. Sci-Fi. That was the name in his mission brief, though most soldiers only knew her as the Blue Ghost. A shadow operative with azure skin who had allegedly infiltrated military installations, sabotaged operations, and, according to the most damning report, assassinated 3 of Arlen's former squad mates during a reconnaissance mission in Sector 7. For 2 years, she had evaded the military's best trackers. But Arlen was different, a scout with a record of captures that had earned him both commendations and whispered fears among the rank and file. He had a gift for finding those who did not wish to be found. His augmented vision picked up a thermal distortion 3 clicks east. Too uniform to be natural, too persistent to be a sensor glitch. Crouching behind the skeleton of an ancient vehicle, Arlen unholstered his rifle and chambered a round. The weapon hummed with soft acknowledgement neural link confirming target acquisition protocols. "I've got you now," he whispered. The distortion moved against the wind, a slight ripple in reality that would be invisible to standard optics. Stealth tech, military grade. Exactly what intelligence had flagged about the Blue Ghost's capabilities. Arlen moved silently across the terrain, his boots making no sound against the cracked earth. Years of hunting had taught him to become part of the environment, to move with such precision that even the dust barely stirred in his wake. The gap closed to 2 clicks, then 1. The distortion remained stationary, now hovering above what appeared to be the remains of a pre-war communications array. Adjusting his rifle settings to electromagnetic pulse, Arlen took careful aim. One shot would disable the cloaking technology without destroying whatever or whoever was inside. He waited for the perfect moment between heartbeats, then squeezed the trigger. The kickback was minimal, but the effect was immediate. A brilliant blue pulse erupted from his rifle muzzle, striking the distortion dead center. The air seemed to shatter like glass, revealing a sleek, drone-like device, approximately 2 meters in length. It wobbled in midair before crashing to the ground with a heavy thud. Arlen approached cautiously, rifle trained on the disabled craft. It wasn't a design he recognized more advanced than standard military issue. As he reached the perimeter of the crash, he noticed a small hatch sliding open with a hydraulic hiss. "Command target neutralized. Appears to be some kind of stealth reconnaissance vehicle." He circled the craft, maintaining distance. "Preparing to..." The words died in his throat as the hatch fully opened. Inside was not the empty pilot compartment he had expected, but a figure. A woman with skin the color of twilight skies, unconscious and secured in what appeared to be a life support cradle. Sci-Fi. Arlen's finger tensed on the trigger. This was his target, the operative responsible for deaths of his comrades, now helpless before him. One shot would complete his mission. Yet, something held him back. The craft's interior was lined with medical equipment, not weapons. The woman's body bore evidence of recent injuries, bandages across her torso, medical nanopatches on her neck and arms. This didn't match the profile of an active operative on a mission. Against protocol, Arlen holstered his weapon and reached into the craft. His gloved hand brushed against a small data terminal embedded beside the life support system. The screen flickered to life at his touch, displaying a series of encrypted files. But what caught his attention was the metallic plate beneath it, clearly inscribed with 2 lines of text. "Let Arlen Cade protect at all costs." His blood ran cold. Why would an enemy operative be carrying his name? And more troublingly, why would she be under orders to protect him? Arlen's conviction wavered. He had been hunting this woman for months, convinced of her guilt, certain of his righteousness. Now, staring at his own name, etched into her equipment, the first seeds of doubt took root in his mind. "Command," he said, finally, decision made. "I'm bringing her in, alive." The silence from his comms unit lasted several seconds too long. "Negative, Lieutenant. You are ordered to terminate the target and recover any intelligence materials." Arlen looked down at the unconscious woman, then back at the inscription bearing his name. "Unable to comply. The target has critical intelligence that can only be extracted if she remains alive. Preparing for transport to base. Cade out." He severed the communication link before command could object further. Whatever the truth was, he would find it, even if it meant defying orders. Something wasn't right, and Arlen had survived this long by trusting his instincts. With careful movements, he extracted CNA from the life support system, noting how the medical equipment fought to maintain connection with her. Her skin was cool to the touch, the blue tone deeper at her extremities. Not paint or artificial coloring as some reports had suggested, but actual pigmentation, perhaps the result of genetic engineering or adaptation to some environmental factor. As he secured her in his transport vehicle, Arlen couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something fundamental, that the narrative he had accepted about this woman and his mission was incomplete at best, deliberately falsified at worst. The journey back to Forward Operating Base Meridian would take 3 hours across hostile terrain. Plenty of time for Cyane to regain consciousness, or for Arlen to reconsider the reckless decision he had just made. But as the transport rumbled across the wasteland, Arlen found his attention repeatedly drawn to the unconscious figure secured in the medical restraints. The blue ghost. The enemy. The woman who, for reasons he couldn't yet fathom, carried his name and an order to protect him. Something told him that delivering her to base would only be the beginning of a much longer and more dangerous journey. The gates of Fabi Meridian loomed ahead, a fortress of concrete and steel, jutting from the wasteland like an accusation against the desolate landscape. Arlen had radioed ahead with a sanitized version of his report target, captured intelligence, recovered medical support required, but he knew the moment of truth would come upon arrival. Captain Rylan met him at the vehicle bay, flanked by 2 security officers, whose hands rested too casually on their sidearms. The intelligence officer's face was a mask of professional neutrality, but Arlen detected the subtle tightening around his eyes that signaled displeasure. "Lieutenant Cade," Rylan greeted him, gaze immediately shifting to the blue-skinned woman strapped to the gurney in Arlen's transport. "I see you've brought us a guest rather than a corpse." "Sir," Arlen acknowledged with a curt nod. "The target possesses critical intelligence related to operations in the frontier. Terminating her would have resulted in permanent data loss." Ryland's eyebrow arched. "And you made this determination based on equipment found with the target, sir. Advanced encryption neural interfaces. Killing her would have triggered fail-safes." The lie came easily born of years operating in the field where survival often depended on quick thinking. "I see." Ryland didn't sound convinced, but he stepped aside, allowing the medical team to approach. "The asset will be transferred to Containment Level 3 for processing. You'll provide a full debrief in 1 hour. Sir, with respect, the target requires medical attention before interrogation." The asset, Ryland emphasized the dehumanizing term, will receive whatever treatment is deemed necessary to extract its intelligence value. Nothing more. He turned to the medical team. "Stabilize for interrogation. Priority code Alpha." Arlen watched as they wheeled Cyane away, her unconscious form disappearing into the bowels of the facility. He had bought her time, but precious little of it. Whatever connection existed between them, whatever truth lay behind the inscription on her equipment, he would need to uncover it quickly. The debrief was predictably tense. Arlen provided the coordinates of the encounter, the specifications of the stealth craft as best he could determine, and a carefully edited account of the capture. He omitted any mention of the plate bearing his name, claiming instead that the craft's onboard systems had indicated valuable intelligence that would be compromised if the pilot died. "And the craft itself," Rylan pressed. Self-destructed after I removed the target. Standard counterintelligence protocol." Another lie, but a necessary one. Arlen had manually triggered the craft's self-destruct sequence himself, ensuring that whatever secrets it contained would remain hidden until he understood what he was dealing with. Rylan studied him for a long moment, suspicion evident in his gaze. "You've developed a reputation, Lieutenant. Effective in the field, brilliant tactician. But lately, your methods have grown unorthodox." Arlen met his gaze steadily. "The frontier demands adaptation, sir." "Indeed." Rylan gathered his data tablet. "You're confined to base until further notice. The asset's interrogation begins at 0600 tomorrow. Your presence is required." After the debrief, Arlen retreated to his quarters, a sparse concrete cell, with little more than a bunk desk and terminal. Standard accommodations for field operatives between missions. He accessed the base's secure network, searching for any information about Psi-NA that might not have been included in his mission briefing. The official records were thin. First appearance approximately 3 years ago. Suspected involvement in 17 incidents across the frontier. Confirmed sightings by reliable sources at 8 locations. The blue skin was noted as a probable disguise or camouflage adaptation, though no samples had ever been recovered for analysis. What troubled Arlen most was the timeline. 3 years ago, he had been assigned to Outpost Vega, serving as reconnaissance for a mining operation in the Northern Territories. During that assignment, he had nearly died when a support beam collapsed. In an abandoned tunnel would have died, if not for the mysterious malfunction in his locator beacon that had prompted an early check-in from base. That incident was the first of several near misses throughout his career. The fuel line that inexplicably repaired itself minutes before his transport would have exploded in mid-air. The enemy sniper, who was found dead with no explanation, 2 kilometers from Arlen's position, having set up with a perfect line of sight to his patrol route. The mysterious system error that had awakened him minutes before a surprise attack on his barracks. Luck, his fellow soldiers had called it. Arlen Cade's infamous luck. Now, staring at the sparse file on the Blue Ghost, he wondered if luck had had nothing to do with it. A soft chime from his terminal interrupted his thoughts. A message from Engineer Fenn, the base's technology specialist. "Preliminary analysis of retrieved data storage complete. Your presence requested in Lab 4. Fenn was hunched over a workbench. When Arlen arrived, his lanky frame practically folded in half as he peered through a magnification device at what appeared to be a small circuit board. He straightened when he noticed Arlen pushing his protective goggles up onto his forehead. "Lieutenant," he greeted. "Thanks for coming so quickly. I thought you'd want to see this." "What am I looking at?" Arlen asked, approaching the workbench. Fenn gestured to the circuit board. "This was recovered from the asset's personal effects. It's a neural interface module, highly advanced, nothing like our standard military issue. But that's not the interesting part." He tapped a section of the board where microscopic engravings were visible under the magnification. "These markings, they're Meridian code signatures." Arlen frowned. "You're saying this technology came from our base?" "Not exactly." Fenn adjusted the magnification. "This specific sequence, it's a security authentication protocol. The kind embedded in high-ranking officers' neural implants, including yours." The implication hung in the air between them. Technology specifically designed to interface with Arlen's own neural implants. "There's more," Fenn continued, seemingly oblivious to Arlen's growing unease. "The data encryption uses a biometric key. I can't access the stored information without the asset's conscious cooperation, brain patterns, retinal scan, the works. Whoever designed this really didn't want anyone but her accessing whatever's stored in here." Arlen stared at the circuit board, mind racing. "Could it be stolen tech, repurposed by hostile forces?" Fenn shook his head. "The integration is too seamless, the coding too specific. This was purpose-built." He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "Lieutenant Captain Rylan ordered me to prepare a full extraction protocol for tomorrow. Neural stripping. It will recover the data, but the process is terminal for the asset." Neural stripping. The euphemism disgusted Arlen. It meant systematically destroying sections of the brain while harvesting their stored data, a process that left the subject brain dead, at best completely destroyed at worst. It was reserved for the most high-value intelligence targets, those deemed too dangerous to keep alive, once their information was extracted. "That won't be necessary," Arlen said firmly. "I'll get her to cooperate." Fenn looked skeptical, but nodded. "You've got until 0600. After that, it's out of both our hands." Arlen left the lab, his pace quickening, as he headed toward Containment Level 3. He needed to speak with Cyane, needed answers before Rylan carried out his extraction protocol. The guards at the security checkpoint almost refused him entry, citing Rylan's orders, but Arlen's rank and reputation eventually won out. Cyane was being held in a maximum security cell, medical monitors tracking her vital signs as she remained unconscious on a steel examination table. The blue of her skin looked almost luminescent under the harsh lights veins of darker cobalt tracing patterns beneath the surface. Arlen dismissed the guard posted outside, then sealed the door behind him. He approached the table cautiously, studying the woman who had become the center of this growing mystery. "Who are you?" he whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "Why were you carrying my name?" Her eyelids fluttered at the sound of his voice, though she didn't wake. The medical readout showed increased brain activity. She was dreaming, perhaps, or fighting her way back to consciousness. On impulse, Arlen placed his hand over hers. The blue skin was cool to the touch, but he felt a pulse stronger now than when he had found her in the wasteland. "If you can hear me," he said quietly, "you need to wake up. They're planning to extract your memories forcibly at 0600. I can't stop it unless you help me understand what's happening." No response, but the brain activity spiked again. She was in there fighting to return. Arlen checked the time. Just after midnight. Less than 6 hours until Rylan would begin the neural stripping process. Not enough time to formulate a proper plan, especially not without knowing what connection he truly shared with this woman. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye. A small, jagged scar at the base of Cyane's neck, partially hidden by her hair. The tissue was raised and discolored, even against her blue skin, an old wound long healed. Arlen froze, one hand unconsciously, rising to his own neck, where an identical scar marked his skin. The result of shrapnel from his first combat mission 10 years ago. A piece of metal that had nearly severed his carotid artery would have killed him if the field medic hadn't reached him in time. The same scar, exactly the same. He left the cell in a daze, mind racing with possibilities each more troubling than the last. The scar, the inscription with his name, the technology designed to interface with his neural implants, it all pointed to a connection that defied the official narrative he had been given about CNA. Back in his quarters, Arlen accessed his personal records, scrolling through mission reports and medical files from the past decade. The pattern became clearer with each incident he reviewed. Every close call, every miraculous escape, they coincided with reported sightings of the Blue Ghost in the same sector. 3 years of alleged sabotage and assassination attributed to CNA. 3 years of impossible luck keeping Arlen alive through situations that should have killed him. By 0500, he had made his decision. He couldn't prove any of his suspicions, couldn't yet understand the full scope of what was happening. But he knew enough to be certain of one thing: he would not allow Rylan to destroy CNA before the truth came to light. Arlen gathered his field kit and access codes, preparing for what would effectively be career suicide, at best a capital offense at worst. But as he checked his weapon one final time, an alarm shattered the pre-dawn quiet, a perimeter breach alert followed by the unmistakable sound of explosions. The base was under attack. The corridor shook violently as another explosion rocked the foundations of Fob Meridian. Emergency lighting bathed everything in a hellish red glow, punctuated by the flicker of failing power systems. Arlen sprinted through the chaos, dodging panicked personnel and falling debris. The attack had come without warning. No intelligence reports, no drone sightings, nothing to suggest an enemy force was even operating in the region. Status report. He barked into his comm unit, but received only static in return. Communications were either jammed or the central system was already down. The containment level was his destination, specifically Sci-Fi's cell. Whatever was happening, he couldn't risk Rylan using the chaos as an opportunity to accelerate the neural stripping protocol. Or worse, simply executing her as a security measure. The security doors to Level 3 were sealed tight, emergency protocols automatically locking down high-value areas during an attack. Arlen placed his palm against the biometric scanner, praying that the backup power was still maintaining the security systems. Lieutenant Arlen Cade, authorization, Sierra 937. He stated clearly, suppressing the urgency in his voice. The scanner hesitated, then flashed green as it recognized his biometrics and voice pattern. Emergency access granted, the system announced as the heavy doors slid open. The containment level was eerily quiet compared to the chaos above the thick walls, muffling the sounds of battle. But the emergency lighting and occasional tremors made it clear that the attack was ongoing and possibly succeeding. Arlen approached Sci-Fi's cell, weapon drawn. The guard who should have been posted at the door was absent, likely called to defend the perimeter. Small mercies. The cell door slid open, revealing an empty examination table, restraints hanging loose. Sci-Fi was gone. "Damn it," Arlen muttered, scanning the room for any sign of where she might have been taken. Had Rylan already moved her, or had she somehow escaped during the confusion? A soft, scraping sound from the air vent overhead answered his question. Arlen looked up just as the vent cover was kicked outward, followed by a lithe blue figure dropping silently to the floor. Sci-Fi. She straightened eyes, locking with his vibrant purple irises, set against midnight blue sclera. Her gaze was alert, intense, showing no sign of the unconsciousness that had gripped her just hours earlier. She wore the same form-fitting stealth suit she'd been captured in, now torn and bloodied in places, but still functional. For a moment, neither moved. Arlen's weapon remained pointed at her chest finger, resting lightly against the trigger. Sci-Fi stood perfectly still, hands visible at her sides, making no threatening movements. "Lieutenant Cade," she said, finally, her voice surprisingly clear and accented with something Arlen couldn't place. "We have approximately 7 minutes before this section is compromised. We need to move." "You know me," Arlen said, not lowering his weapon. "Why were you carrying my name? What connection do we have?" Sci-Fi's expression remained neutral, but something flashed behind her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. "This isn't the time for explanations. The attack on this base was orchestrated to cover an assassination, yours specifically. If we stay, you die. And I'm supposed to trust the word of an enemy operative," Arlen demanded, though even as he said it, he felt the hollowness of the accusation. "You've already begun to doubt their version of me," she countered. "Or you wouldn't have defied orders to bring me in alive." She took a step forward, seemingly unconcerned by his weapon. "You saw the inscription. You've pieced together enough to suspect the truth. I've been protecting you, Lieutenant, for years." Another explosion closer this time. The lights flickered ominously. "Why would you protect me?" Arlen asked, confusion and frustration mingling in his voice. "Because you're important." Sci-Fi glanced at the ceiling as dust rained down from the latest impact. "More important than you know. But right now, all that matters is getting you out of this base alive." Decision time. Arlen could attempt to detain her again, drag her back up to the command level, and hand her over to Rylan, assuming the captain was still alive, and the base hadn't been completely overrun. Or he could trust his instincts, which were screaming that this woman held answers he desperately needed. The choice was made for him when the door to the cell block burst open, and 2 soldiers entered, except they weren't wearing Meridian base uniforms. Their armor was matte black faces concealed behind featureless tactical masks. The symbol emblazoned on their shoulders belonged to no military unit Arlen recognized. The intruders spotted them immediately. "Target acquired," one stated flatly, raising a weapon designed for lethality rather than capture. Arlen reacted on pure instinct, shoving Cyane behind him and firing in one fluid motion. His first shot caught the lead attacker in the chest, the impact throwing them back against the wall. The second attacker returned fire, forcing Arlen to duck behind a medical cart. Cyane moved with startling speed, closing the distance to the second attacker before they could adjust their aim. Her fighting style was unlike anything Arlen had seen, not military hand-to-hand, but something more fluid, almost predatory. She disabled the attacker with 3 precise strikes, the last of which rendered them unconscious. "We need to go, now." She retrieved the fallen attacker's weapon, checking its ammunition with practiced ease. Arlen studied her for a moment, then nodded. "There's a maintenance tunnel that connects to the vehicle bay. If we can reach it, we might be able to commandeer transport." They moved through the containment level, intense silence, encountering no further resistance. The maintenance tunnel was exactly where Arlen remembered a narrow passage used by engineering crews to access critical systems without disrupting the main corridors. "You know this base well," CNA observed as they navigated the cramped space. "I've been stationed here between missions for the past year," Arlen replied. "You seem familiar with it yourself." She didn't respond to that, focusing instead on moving silently ahead of him. The tunnel eventually opened into a small utility room, adjacent to the vehicle bay. Through the small observation window, they could see that the bay was in chaos, personnel rushing to mobilize defenses, wounded being loaded onto transport's officers, shouting orders that were barely audible over the continuing explosions. "The attack is concentrated on the eastern perimeter," Arlen noted, studying the deployment pattern. "If we take one of the scout vehicles and head west, we might avoid the main conflict zone." Cyane nodded in agreement. "The scout vehicle with the modified engine, third from the left. It has the best chance of outrunning any pursuit." Arlen glanced at her, surprised by her specific knowledge. "How do you—" "Later," she cut him off. "On my signal, we move directly to the vehicle. No detours, no hesitation." She waited until a particularly large explosion drew everyone's attention toward the eastern wall, then pushed the door open. "Now!" They sprinted across the bay, weaving between personnel, too preoccupied with the attack to notice them. The scout vehicle Cyane had identified was indeed third from the left, a lighter transport designed for reconnaissance, its engine recently upgraded for extended range missions. Arlen had used it himself several times in the past month. As they reached the vehicle, an alarm sounded different from the perimeter breach alert. This was a security alarm specifically for the containment level. "They've discovered you're missing," Arlen said, climbing into the driver's seat and activating the ignition sequence. The vehicle hummed to life beneath them repulsion field, engaging to hover several inches above the ground. "Not just me," Cyane replied, taking the gunner's position. "They know you helped me escape. We're both targets now." Before Arlen could respond, a voice cut through the chaos of the vehicle bay. Lieutenant Cade, Captain Rylan, stood 50 meters away, flanked by security personnel. His uniform was torn, and bloodied face streaked with ash, but his voice carried clear authority. "Stand down immediately. The asset is to be secured." Arlen's hands tightened on the controls. There was no going back now. "Hold on," he told Cyane, then gunned the engine. The scout vehicle shot forward repulsion field, allowing it to glide over obstacles as they headed for the western exit. Behind them, Rylan was shouting orders, and the security team was scrambling to intercept them. "They're sealing the bay doors," Cyane warned, watching the massive steel barriers begin to descend across the exit. Arlen pushed the vehicle to maximum acceleration, aiming for the narrowing gap. "This is going to be close." The scout vehicle screamed toward the exit engines, straining, as Arlen demanded every ounce of power. Weapons fire erupted behind them, shots pinging harmlessly off the vehicle's armored rear. The bay doors continued their inexorable descent, the gap shrinking with each passing second. In the final moment, Arlen tilted the vehicle onto its side, reducing their profile just enough to slip beneath the closing doors, with centimeters to spare. The scrape of metal on metal sent sparks flying as they barely cleared the barrier, emerging into the harsh daylight of the wasteland beyond. Arlen leveled the vehicle, orienting westward, away from both the base and the attacking forces on the eastern perimeter. The wasteland stretched before them, desolate and unforgiving, but in that moment it represented freedom. "They'll send pursuit teams," Cyane said, scanning the horizon behind them. "I know." Arlen increased their speed, putting as much distance between them and Fob Meridian as possible. "But they'll have their hands full with the attack for a while. It buys us time." Cyane nodded, then turned her attention to the navigation system. "Head northwest. There's an abandoned outpost in Sector 11 where we can regroup." "Sector 11 is Deadlands territory," Arlen objected. "Radiation levels are still lethal in most areas." "There are safe passages if you know where to look." She programmed coordinates into the system. "Trust me, Lieutenant. I've kept you alive this long." Arlen glanced at her, studying the blue-skinned woman who had upended everything he thought he knew. Enemy operative, protector, mystery. He still had no idea which was true, or if perhaps all of them were. "I think it's time you told me exactly who you are," he said, as the scout vehicle raced across the wasteland, Fob Meridian becoming smaller in the distance behind them. "And why you've been protecting me." Cyane's purple eyes met his unreadable and ancient. "It's a long story, Lieutenant, and you may not like what you hear." "We've got nothing but time and wasteland ahead of us," Arlen replied. "Start talking." They had been traveling for 3 hours when the first pursuit vehicle appeared on the long-range scanners. As Cyane had predicted, Fob Meridian had eventually organized a response to their escape, despite the ongoing attack. The base wouldn't easily surrender one of its top operatives and a high-value intelligence asset. Heavy transport military class. Arlen noted, studying the scanner readout. "They're moving faster than they should be able to. Modified engines probably stripped down for pursuit." CNA didn't look surprised. "They want us badly. You still haven't explained why." Arlen guided their vehicle through a narrow passage between towering rock formations, using the terrain to temporarily break sensor lock. "You've told me about your operations in the frontier, how you've intervened to save my life multiple times. But not why." Her expression remained carefully neutral. "The reasons are complicated." "Simplify them," Arlen insisted. "I've thrown away my career, possibly my life, based on instinct and fragments of evidence. I think I've earned some answers." Cyane was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the desolate landscape rushing past them. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its clinical detachment. "I was created in a laboratory that no longer exists on a continent that was destroyed in the war. My genetic structure was designed for adaptability, my cognitive functions enhanced beyond standard human parameters." She turned to face him directly. "I was made to be a guardian, specifically your guardian." Arlen's brow furrowed. "That's not possible. You said yourself you've been protecting me for 3 years. I've been a soldier for over a decade." "I didn't say I was doing my job the entire time," she replied, a hint of what might have been remorse crossing her features. "The facility where I was created was targeted early in the conflict. Most of the research was destroyed, most of my kind eliminated. I spent years simply trying to survive, piecing together fragments of my purpose." "Which is what exactly?" Before she could answer, the scanner beeped urgently. The pursuit vehicle had changed course, cutting across open terrain to intercept them. "They're taking a direct approach," Arlen muttered, adjusting their route. "Willing to risk the radiation zones to catch us. Then we'll have to risk them too." Cyane recalibrated the navigation system. "There's a canyon system 2 kilometers ahead. The readings will be hot, but my physiology can handle moderate radiation. Can yours?" Arlen nodded grimly. "Field enhancements. Not indefinitely, but for a few hours." The canyon appeared ahead of them, a jagged wound in the earth. Warning indicators flashed across the vehicle's display as they approached radiation levels exceeding safety parameters, unstable terrain, extreme hazard warnings. Arlen guided them into the narrow passage, the walls of the canyon rising around them, like the ribcage of some enormous fossilized beast. The radiation counter ticked upward, steadily. Nothing immediately lethal, but prolonged exposure would cause cellular damage, even with their enhancements. Behind them, the pursuit vehicle hesitated at the canyon entrance. "They're unwilling to follow," Cyane observed. "That buys us time, but we can't stay in here long." Arlen navigated the twisting passages, focusing on maintaining control of the vehicle over the unstable terrain. "Finish your explanation. You said you were created to be my guardian. Why, what makes me so important?" Cyane's gaze lingered on him, something like sadness flickering across her features. "You carry a genetic sequence that exists in less than 1,000% of the surviving population. A sequence that conveys natural immunity to the biogenetic weapons deployed in the final days of the war." The revelation landed heavily between them. "That's why Command kept sending me into hot zones," Arlen realized. "The missions where other scouts fell ill, or worse. They were testing my resistance." "Yes," Cyane's voice hardened. "Using you as a test subject, rather than treating you as the invaluable resource you are. Your genetic pattern could be the key to developing treatments, possibly even cures for the lingering biogenetic contamination." Arlen's mind raced, reassessing years of missions and decisions through this new lens. "If what you're saying is true, why would they send you to hunt me down? Why call you an enemy operative?" "Because I interfered with their testing protocols," Cyane replied. "Each time I prevented your death, I disrupted their data collection. Eventually, they identified a pattern, recognized that something was protecting their test subject. That made me a threat." "Captain Rylan," Arlen muttered, pieces falling into place. "He's Intelligence Division specializing in biogenetic research." Cyane nodded. "The attacks on your squad members, the ones I was blamed for, they were sanctioned eliminations. Your comrades had begun questioning the patterns of your assignments, the unusual survival rates. They were silenced, and I was framed for their deaths." The canyon widened ahead of them, opening into a basin scattered with the ruins of pre-war structures. Radiation levels dropped slightly, still dangerous, but less immediately threatening. Arlen guided the vehicle toward what appeared to be the remains of a transportation hub, the skeletal framework of its roof providing minimal cover from aerial surveillance. As he powered down the engines, the weight of Cyane's revelations settled fully upon him. If she was telling the truth, and increasingly he believed she was, then his entire military career had been built on a foundation of lies. He wasn't a respected scout being sent on critical missions. He was a lab rat being pushed to his biological limits, his survival valuable only for the data it generated. "The neural interface module," he said, suddenly remembering Engineer Fenn's analysis. "The one designed to interface with my implants. What was it for?" "Data collection primarily," Cyane explained. "It allowed me to monitor your vital signs, track your locations, interface with your military systems when necessary to ensure your survival. The module contains detailed records of every intervention, every manipulation of circumstances I performed to keep you alive. Which is why Rylan wanted to neural strip you, to discover how you were interfering with their tests." She nodded. "And to eliminate the evidence of their own actions. My death would have tied up their loose ends quite neatly." Arlen fell silent, processing everything. The sound of their breathing seemed unnaturally loud in the confined space of the vehicle, punctuated by the occasional click of the radiation counter. "We should rest while we can," he said finally. "The pursuit teams will eventually find a way around the radiation zone, or they'll bring in air support with better shielding." Cyane agreed, though she showed no signs of fatigue, despite her recent injuries and their frantic escape. As Arlen leaned back in his seat, attempting to find a comfortable position, a question nagged at him. "You said you were created specifically to be my guardian," he noted. "How is that possible? I would have been a child when your facility was developing its projects." The war lasted longer than most realize, Cyane replied cryptically. And time flows differently in certain circumstances. Before Arlen could press for clarification, the vehicle's proximity alert blared to life. He lunged for the scanner, cursing under his breath. 3 signals, he reported. Coming in fast from the east aerial transport. Cyane was already moving, gathering their limited supplies. They've brought in the heavy response team. We need to abandon the vehicle, it's too easily tracked. Arlen nodded grimly, powering up the scout vehicle once more. I'll create a diversion. Program the autopilot to continue northwest, draw them away from our actual position. As they exited the vehicle, Arlen set the automated controls watching as the scout transport glided away across the basin. It would buy them time, but not much. The response team would realize the deception as soon as they performed a biological scan. This way, CNA directed, leading him toward a half-collapsed structure that might once have been a maintenance facility. There's underground access old service tunnels that partially survived the bombing. They had barely reached the entrance when the first aerial transport thundered overhead searchlights, cutting through the gathering dusk. Arlen and CNA pressed themselves against the decaying wall, merging with the shadows as the craft circled their abandoned vehicle. They'll deploy ground teams soon, Arlen whispered. How far do these tunnels extend? Far enough to get us beyond their search perimeter, if we move quickly. The entrance to the tunnel system was hidden beneath debris and years of accumulated dust. Cyane cleared it with efficient movements, revealing a narrow passage leading down into darkness. She produced a small illumination device from her equipment, the soft blue glow revealing rusted ladder rungs descending into the earth. Ladies first, Arlen gestured, keeping watch on the aerial transports now landing near their decoy vehicle. Cyane arched an eyebrow, the first hint of humor she had displayed, then descended quickly into the tunnel. Arlen followed, pulling the debris back over the entrance as best he could before climbing down. The air below was stale but breathable, the radiation levels noticeably lower than on the surface. The tunnel stretched before them, ancient emergency lighting still functioning in patches, casting eerie shadows across the corroded walls. This way, Cyane indicated, moving confidently through the labyrinthine passages. These tunnels were part of the pre-war infrastructure maintenance access for underground transport systems. Most collapsed during the bombings, but sections remained intact, especially in areas designed to withstand attacks. Arlen followed, noting with professional appreciation how easily she navigated the complex network. You've been here before. I've studied the old infrastructure extensively, she replied. Knowledge of safe passages has been essential to my mission. They moved in silence for nearly an hour, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. The tunnels gradually changed character, transitioning from maintenance passages to what appeared to be a more sophisticated facility. Laboratory equipment visible in some chambers, reinforced doors, bearing faded security classifications. What is this place? Arlen asked, eyeing a room filled with dust-covered medical equipment. Research outpost, Cyane replied tersely. One of many established before the conflict escalated. This one focused on human enhancement, preparing for the possibility of long-term survival in hostile environments. Her tone suggested personal knowledge, rather than academic understanding, but Arlen didn't press the issue. They continued deeper into the facility, eventually reaching what appeared to be a command center, a circular room lined with defunct monitoring stations and a central platform that might once have displayed holographic information. We'll rest here, Cyane decided. The structure is reinforced, radiation levels are minimal, and there are multiple escape routes if needed. Arlen surveyed the room with a tactical eye, noting entrances cover positions, defensible angles. Old habits. How long do we have before they track us here? Hours at least, possibly days. Cyane was examining one of the monitoring stations, brushing away decades of dust. This facility doesn't appear on current military maps. It was classified beyond top secret even before the war. And yet you know about it. She met his gaze steadily. I was created in a similar facility. The research programs were Connected. Arlen sank into a chair that creaked ominously beneath his weight, suddenly aware of the exhaustion permeating his body. The events of the past 24 hours, the capture, the revelations the escape had pushed him to his limits. Enhanced stamina or not, he needed rest. "You should sleep," Cyane suggested, as if reading his thoughts. "I'll maintain watch." "You need rest too," Arlen argued. "You were unconscious when I found you injured." A faint smile touched her blue lips. "My physiology requires less recovery time than yours. I've already healed from the worst of the damage." As if to prove her point, she removed the torn section of her stealth suit, covering her shoulder, revealing skin that showed no trace of the wounds Arlen had observed earlier. Whatever she was, her regenerative capabilities far exceeded human norms. "Sleep, Lieutenant," she repeated, her tone gentler now. "We have a long journey ahead of us." Despite his training to resist, to maintain vigilance even in the most extreme circumstances, Arlen found himself succumbing to exhaustion. As consciousness slipped away, he heard CNA moving about the room, activating systems that had lain dormant for decades, preparing for whatever came next in their uncertain future. His last thought before darkness claimed him was simple and troubling. If everything CNA had told him was true, then he had spent his entire military career as nothing more than an unwitting test subject. And the real enemy wasn't the blue-skinned woman who had saved his life, but the very institution he had sworn to serve. Arlen awoke to the sound of quiet, rhythmic breathing and a soft blue glow illuminating the command center. He tensed instinctively, years of field training bringing him to full alertness in seconds. The events of the previous day rushed back: the capture, the escape, the revelations about his true purpose within the military. Cyane sat cross-legged on the central platform, eyes closed, hands resting palms up on her knees. The blue glow emanated not from any equipment, but from patterns beneath her skin, bioluminescent veins tracing complex networks across her exposed arms and face. It was beautiful and alien, a stark reminder that whatever she wasn't entirely human. Sensing his wakefulness, her eyes opened, those startling purple irises, now ringed with the same luminescent blue. "Your vital signs have stabilized," she noted clinically. "How do you feel?" Arlen stood, stretching, muscles stiff from sleeping in the ancient chair. "Functional. How long was I out?" 6 hours, 17 minutes. The luminescence beneath her skin gradually faded as she uncrossed her legs and stood. "No pursuit signals detected. We appear to have successfully evaded the response team. For now," Arlen added. He glanced around the room, noticing that several of the monitoring stations now displayed active screens, streams of data flowing across them. "You've been busy." "Reactivating old systems, gathering information." Cyane gestured to the central platform, which now projected a faint, holographic map of the surrounding region. "I've been tracking military communications. They've expanded the search perimeter, but they're focusing on the wrong sectors. Our diversion worked." Arlen approached the map, studying the topography. "Where are we headed?" "Here." She indicated a location approximately 200 kilometers northwest of their current position. "It's a research facility, one of the few that survived the war relatively intact. If we can reach it, there's equipment there that can verify everything I've told you. Proof of your genetic significance records of the program that created me." "And after that?" Arlen asked. "What's the endgame here? I can't exactly return to service, not after being branded a traitor. And you're still the military's most wanted target." Cyane's expression sobered. "There are others who understand your importance, scientists and doctors, operating outside military control, working to develop treatments for the biogenetic contamination. If we can reach them with your genetic samples and my research data, there's a chance to actually help people, rather than simply using you as a test subject." It was the first time she had explicitly mentioned a larger purpose, something beyond merely keeping Arlen alive. A noble goal, if what she claimed was true. "We should move soon," she continued, deactivating the holographic display. "I've plotted a route through the old tunnel systems. We can cover nearly half the distance underground, minimizing our exposure on the surface. As they prepared to depart, gathering what limited supplies they could scavenge from the facility, Arlen noticed CNA wincing slightly. When she reached for equipment, a nearly imperceptible gesture that she quickly masked. "You're still injured," he observed. "Residual damage to internal tissues," she acknowledged with clinical detachment. "Nothing that will impact our progress." Arlen wasn't convinced. "You said your physiology heals quickly." "From standard injuries, yes. The damage I sustained before your capture was more extensive." She averted her gaze, focusing on organizing supplies. "My craft was attacked while I was monitoring your mission. The stealth systems were compromised, forcing me to perform emergency maneuvers in radiation-contaminated airspace. The combination of impact trauma and radiation exposure requires more time to fully heal." The explanation raised more questions than it answered, but Arlen sensed now wasn't the time to press for details. They had more immediate concerns, namely covering 200 kilometers of hostile territory while evading military pursuit. The tunnel system extended far beyond what Arlen had expected, a complex network of maintenance corridors and research facilities that formed a hidden infrastructure beneath the wasteland above. Cyane navigated with unwavering confidence, selecting pathways and access points that occasionally required climbing through partially collapsed sections or wading through flooded chambers. "How long has this been here?" Arlen asked, as they passed through what appeared to be a massive underground hangar, now empty, save for the skeletal remains of vehicles, long since stripped for parts. "These facilities predate the war by decades," CNA explained. "Originally constructed as civil defense measures, then expanded for research purposes as tensions escalated. Most people have forgotten they exist or never knew in the first place. Classification levels were extreme. But you know them intimately." A shadow crossed her features. "I spent years in facilities like these, not always by choice." The implication hung between them as they continued their journey. Hours passed in relative silence, broken only by necessary communication about routes and obstacles. Gradually, Arlen became aware of CNA's worsening condition, her breathing more labored movements, less fluid. She was hiding the extent of her injuries, pushing herself beyond what should have been possible. When they reached a junction where 6 different tunnels converged in a cavernous chamber, Arlen called a halt. "We need to rest," he insisted. "Both of us." Cyane looked as though she might protest, but instead nodded tersely. 30 minutes, no longer." They settled in an alcove that offered good visibility of all entrance points, sharing the meager rations they had salvaged from the command center. The food was ancient, preserved through technologies designed for extreme longevity, but provided necessary nutrition despite the unpleasant taste. "Tell me about the facility we're heading to," Arlen said, breaking the silence. "What makes you so certain it survived when so many others were destroyed?" Cyane considered the question, her purple eyes distant. "It was built differently, deeper, more heavily shielded, and its location was removed from official records early in the conflict, a precaution taken by researchers who suspected their work might be targeted." "What kind of work?" "Genetic preservation, bioremediation research, developing countermeasures for the weapons everyone knew were coming." She met his gaze directly. The scientists there weren't working for any single government or military. They were trying to save what could be saved, prepare for what couldn't be prevented. "Idealists," Arlen noted not unkindly. "Perhaps. But their foresight may prove invaluable now." Cyane's expression softened slightly. "The facility houses genetic samples from before the contamination, pure baseline human DNA, alongside records of the adaptations that have emerged since. Your immunity isn't unique, Lieutenant, but it's exceedingly rare and potentially the most complete variation we've documented." The way she spoke, the depth of knowledge, the personal investment continued to suggest a connection more profound than she had revealed. "You said you were created to be my guardian," Arlen recalled. But that doesn't explain how you know so much about these facilities, about research conducted decades ago. How old are you, Cyane? The question seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment, the clinical detachment faltered, revealing something vulnerable beneath. Time becomes complicated when you exist as I do, she said finally. Chronologically, I've experienced approximately 37 years. But there were periods of suspension gaps in active consciousness. And my cellular structure doesn't degrade as human cells do. You're immortal, Arlen asked, skepticism evident in his tone. No. A fleeting smile touched her lips. Just difficult to kill under normal circumstances. But not impossible, as recent events have demonstrated. Before Arlen could pursue this line of questioning further, a distant sound echoed through the chamber. Metal striking metal, followed by the unmistakable cadence of disciplined movement. Footsteps. Multiple sets. "We've got company," he whispered, automatically reaching for his weapon. Cyane was already on her feet, gathering their supplies with silent efficiency. "Military search team. They must have detected power usage when I activated the old systems." "How far to the surface from here?" "2 levels up, approximately half a kilometer east." She gestured to one of the smaller tunnels, branching from the main chamber. That passage leads to maintenance access points that should still be functional. They moved swiftly, keeping to shadows as they navigated the narrow tunnel. The sounds of pursuit grew louder behind them, voices now audible, orders being relayed. Professional, methodical. This wasn't a random patrol. It was a dedicated search team with specific targets. The tunnel gradually inclined upward, eventually terminating at a service ladder, leading to a hatch in the ceiling. Cyane ascended first, testing the mechanism with careful pressure. The hatch resisted initially, decades of disuse having sealed it shut, but eventually yielded with a protesting groan that seemed deafening in the confined space. Daylight spilled into the tunnel, harsh and blinding, after hours underground. Cyane pulled herself through the opening, then reached back to help Arlen. They emerged onto the surface of the wasteland, the sun hanging low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. "We're exposed here," Arlen noted, scanning their surroundings. They had surfaced in what appeared to be the ruins of a small outpost, crumbling walls, providing minimal cover. "The search team is still underground," CNA replied, securing the hatch behind them. "But they'll realize our route soon enough. We need transportation." As if in answer to her statement, the distant hum of engines carried across the wasteland. Arlen dropped to a crouch, gesturing for Cyane to do the same, as he used his tactical visor to scan the horizon. "Supply convoy," he reported, identifying the signature of military-grade repulsion engines. 3 vehicles, minimal escort. Probably routine resupply run for the outposts in this sector. "Can you identify the vehicle types?" Arlen adjusted his visor, enhancing the magnification. "Standard configuration. Lead vehicle is command and communication. Second is personnel transport. Third is cargo." "The cargo transport would be ideal," Cyane mused. "Less crew, more range." "You're suggesting we hijack a military supply vehicle?" Arlen said, though it wasn't really a question. Their options were limited, and the convoy represented both a threat and an opportunity. "Do you have a better suggestion, Lieutenant?" He didn't. The convoy would reach their position in approximately 15 minutes, based on its current speed and trajectory. Not much time to prepare an ambush, but enough if they worked efficiently. "We'll need to disable the lead vehicle first," Arlen decided, slipping back into tactical planning mode. "Cut off communications before they can alert other units. Then neutralize the personnel transport before they can deploy. Non-lethal approaches where possible," Cyane stipulated. "Many of the soldiers are simply following orders, unaware of the larger situation." Arlen nodded in agreement. Despite everything he had learned about the military's treatment of him, he had no desire to harm fellow soldiers who were merely performing their duties. They worked quickly, gathering what materials they could from the surrounding ruins, and preparing positions that would allow them to target the convoy as it passed. Arlen modified his rifle for electromagnetic pulse rounds, capable of disabling vehicle systems, without causing explosions that might injure the occupants. As the convoy approached, Arlen positioned himself on a partially collapsed wall that offered a clear line of sight to the path below. Sci-Fi took a flanking position, the weapon she had acquired from the attackers at FOB Meridian, similarly adjusted for non-lethal engagement. "On my signal," Arlen instructed over their short-range communicators. "Lead vehicle first, then personnel carrier. I'll handle the cargo transport." The convoy appeared around a bend in the ancient road, repulsion fields kicking up swirls of dust as the vehicles glided across the broken terrain. Standard formation, maintaining even spacing sensors, likely configured for routine threat detection rather than specific ambush scenarios. Arlen waited until the lead vehicle was directly in his sights, then fired. The EMP round struck with precision, causing the vehicle's systems to short out in a cascade of blue electrical arcs. It dropped heavily to the ground, repulsion field collapsing instantly. Sci-Fi fired simultaneously, her shots targeting the communication array on the lead vehicle and the engine housing of the personnel carrier. Both hits were clean and effective. The second vehicle lurched sideways as its propulsion system failed, asymmetrically nearly tipping over before settling at an awkward angle. The cargo transport reacted immediately, defensive systems activating as the crew realized they were under attack. But they were too late. Arlen's second shot disabled their weapons platform, and his third penetrated the engine housing, shutting down the repulsion field and stranding the vehicle. From there, the operation proceeded with military precision. Sci-Fi moved to secure the lead vehicle, while Arlen targeted the personnel carrier, using stun rounds to incapacitate the soldiers as they attempted to deploy. Within minutes, all three vehicles were neutralized, their crews either unconscious or restrained. Minimal injuries, Sci-Fi reported as they regrouped at the cargo transport. Mostly shock and minor contusions. They'll recover fully. Arlen was already accessing the vehicle's systems, overriding security protocols with his command credentials, which surprisingly still functioned despite his presumed fugitive status. "They haven't flagged my access yet," he noted. "Either they're keeping my desertion quiet or they're hoping I'll use my credentials so they can track us." The latter, most likely, Sci-Fi agreed, helping him secure the transport for their use. "We should operate under the assumption that any system access will be monitored." The cargo transport was ideal for their purposes, well stocked, with supplies heavily shielded against environmental hazards, and designed for long-range operations. Arlen disabled the standard tracking systems, while Sci-Fi transferred their essential equipment. "What about them?" Arlen asked, gesturing to the incapacitated soldiers they had bound inside the personnel carrier. "They have emergency beacons and survival gear," Sci-Fi replied. "A recovery team will be dispatched once they miss their scheduled check-in. They're safer here than accompanying us." Arlen nodded, though the decision didn't sit entirely comfortably with him. These were his fellow soldiers, men and women who, like him, had sworn oaths to protect what remained of civilization. But Sci-Fi was right. Bringing them along would only endanger both parties further. With the transport secured, they set course for their destination, the research facility that promised answers and potentially a new purpose for Arlen, beyond being a military test subject. The vehicle moved swiftly across the wasteland, its enhanced shielding protecting them from the radiation zones they occasionally had to traverse. As Arlen piloted the transport, Sci-Fi continued monitoring communication channels, tracking the military's response to their ambush, and adjusting their route accordingly. Her condition had stabilized somewhat, but Arlen noticed the occasional rigid posture, the careful way she managed her movements. Her injuries were still affecting her, despite her enhanced healing abilities. "There's a medical kit in the supply inventory," he observed, nodding toward the cargo area. "Military grade. Might help with whatever's still troubling you." Sci-Fi glanced at him, something like surprise flickering across her features. "You've gotten better at reading non-human physiological cues." "I've spent enough time observing you," Arlen replied simply. "And despite your differences, pain looks pretty universal." After a moment's hesitation, she retrieved the medical kit, selecting a tissue regenerator and several vials of synthetic plasma. With clinical efficiency, she administered the treatments to herself, focusing on her torso, where the worst of the internal damage seemed concentrated. The radiation exposure compromised my cellular integrity, she explained, noticing Arlen's questioning look. Standard regeneration protocols are effective for mechanical damage, but radiation requires additional intervention. And the blue skin, is that a result of your genetic engineering or an adaptation to radiation? The question seemed to amuse her slightly. Both, in a way. The base genetic modifications included pigmentation that offers radiation resistance, but the particular shade of blue was... She paused, searching for the right word. An aesthetic choice by the research team. They thought it appropriate given my intended function. Which was... Guardian, protector. Her purple eyes met his. Sentinel in the original terminology. The term triggered a memory in Arlen, a fragment of military history from his training years. Project Sentinel. I thought it was a myth. Most classified projects eventually become myths or urban legends, Cyane replied. It makes them easier to dismiss if details ever leak. The rumors said it was an attempt to create enhanced soldiers, capable of operating in contaminated zones without protection. Biological weapons to counter biological weapons. Arlen studied her, with newfound understanding. But that was nearly 50 years ago. As I said, time becomes complicated in my case. She administered the final treatment, then returned the medical supplies to their case. The original Project Sentinel was indeed focused on creating combat units, but there was a secondary initiative less numerous, more specialized. Guardians designed to protect specific individuals deemed essential to post-war recovery. Like me, Arlen said softly. Like your genetic line, yes. Cyane's expression softened slightly. Though you specifically were unforeseen. The original project identified and protected genetic patterns. The specific humans carrying those patterns were variables. The implication was both fascinating and disturbing. Cyane hadn't been created to protect Arlen personally, but rather, the genetic immunity he carried, an immunity that predated him, passed down through generations, that Project Sentinel had apparently been monitoring for decades. How many others like you are there? Arlen asked. Other Sentinels? Few now. Something like grief shadowed her features. We were never numerous, and the years have not been kind. War hunting by those who feared us, simple attrition. I've encountered only 3 others in the past decade, each protecting their own genetic lines. The conversation fell into silence as they continued across the wasteland, each processing the implications of these revelations. For Arlen, it meant reconstructing his entire understanding of his place in the world. Not just a soldier, not merely a test subject, but the carrier of a genetic legacy, deemed essential enough to warrant protection across generations. For Cyane, Arlen suspected it meant finally sharing a burden carried in solitude for longer than he could truly comprehend. As night fell across the wasteland, they continued their journey, the cargo transport's powerful engines eating up the distance toward the research facility that might hold final answers and new beginnings. The facility was barely visible against the horizon, low-profile structures, half buried in the earth, designed to blend with the natural topography rather than stand against it. Without Cyane's guidance, Arlen would have missed it entirely, mistaking the subtle contours for natural formations, weathered by decades of harsh conditions. Camouflage was prioritized over imposing architecture, Cyane explained, as they approached. Unlike military installations that relied on fortifications and visible deterrence, this facility's security came from anonymity. They had abandoned the cargo transport several kilometers back, continuing on foot, to avoid triggering any automated defense systems that might still be functional. The journey had taken its toll on both of them, Arlen feeling the strain of extended exertion, even with his enhanced physiology, and Cyane still managing the aftermath of her injuries, despite the medical treatment. As they crested a final ridge overlooking the facility, Arlen raised his tactical visor, scanning for energy signatures or security measures. Seems dormant. No active power sources I can detect. The primary systems are deep underground, heavily shielded, Cyane replied. Surface scans won't penetrate. She pointed to what appeared to be a simple outcropping of rock. That's our entry point. The rock proved to be a cleverly disguised access door, its surface coated with synthetic material that mimicked the surrounding terrain in both appearance and thermal signature. Cyane approached it confidently, placing her palm against a section that appeared no different from the rest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with the faintest hum of awakening systems, seams appeared in the surface, outlining a door that slowly recessed and slid aside. Biometric recognition, Arlen observed. Your palm print is still in the system after all these years. Not exactly. Cyane held up her hand, showing him the faint blue luminescence that had briefly appeared beneath her skin. My cellular structure contains markers specifically designed to trigger these security systems. It's not reading a palm print. It's recognizing a genetic key. The entrance revealed a narrow corridor, sloping downward into darkness. As they stepped inside, lights activated in sequence ahead of them, responding to their presence. The door sealed behind them with a soft hiss, security systems re-engaging. The facility should recognize me as friendly, Arlen noted, recalling Cyane's explanation of her purpose. Since you were designed to protect my genetic line. In theory, she agreed. Though systems this old might have degraded or developed quirks. Stay close. The corridor extended deep into the earth, gradually widening into a proper hallway, lined with doors. Unlike the military installations, Arlen was familiar with this facility, featured organic design elements, curved walls, recessed lighting that mimicked natural daylight, even sections where living plants grew from integrated hydroponic systems. It was designed for long-term habitation, Cyane explained, noting his surprise at the vegetation. The researchers understood that psychological well-being required more than sterile efficiency. They passed through several security checkpoints, each recognizing CNA's genetic markers and allowing them to proceed deeper into the complex. Eventually, the corridor opened into a vast central chamber, dominated by what appeared to be a medical research area. Advanced equipment, some designs Arlen had never seen before, filled the space, all centered around a circular platform, reminiscent of the command center they had rested in during their underground journey. This is it, Cyane said, her voice carrying a weight of significance. The heart of the research that created me, and the repository of knowledge about your genetic immunity. She moved to a central console, her fingers dancing across interfaces that awoke at her touch. Screens illuminated around the chamber, displaying cascades of data, genetic sequences, research notes, archived videos of experiments, and procedures that Arlen could only partially comprehend. I need to verify that the primary systems are still functional, Cyane explained, focused on her work, and locate the specific records pertaining to your genetic pattern. Arlen circled the chamber slowly, taking in the advanced technology. Much of it appeared to be medical in nature, equipment for genetic analysis, cellular reconstruction, biological sampling. But other elements suggested broader purposes: communication arrays, data storage systems of enormous capacity, even what looked like cryogenic preservation units built into the walls. How many people worked here? He asked, noting the scale of the facility. At its peak, nearly 200 researchers and support staff, Cyane replied, without looking up from her task. Many lived here permanently during the later stages of the war, when surface conditions became increasingly dangerous. And now, her hands paused briefly. Now, we are the first to enter in approximately 27 years based on the system timestamps. The thought was sobering, a facility of this size and significance abandoned for decades, while the world above continued its slow recovery from devastation. How many other repositories of knowledge and technology lay forgotten beneath the wasteland? I have located the genetic database, Cyane announced, her voice breaking into his thoughts. And She hesitated, something in her expression shifting. There's a message, encoded specifically for Sentinel-class entities. A message from whom? Dr. Eliana Voss, the lead researcher on the Sentinel project. Cyane's voice had lost some of its clinical detachment, a hint of emotion breaking through. My creator, for lack of a better term. She activated a projection system, and a holographic figure appeared on the central platform, a woman in her 50s, with streaks of gray in her dark hair, and eyes that conveyed both intelligence and profound weariness. Sentinel units. The recording began, the image flickering occasionally, but the voice remaining clear. If you are receiving this message, then you have survived the war and maintained your primary directive to protect the genetic lines assigned to your care. For this, you have my deepest gratitude and respect. The holographic doctor paused, gathering herself visibly before continuing. The situation has deteriorated beyond our most pessimistic projections. The biogenetic weapons deployed in the final phase of the conflict have mutated beyond our ability to counter them. Contamination is spreading faster than anticipated, and the immune genetic patterns we identified are more crucial than ever. Another pause, this one heavier with implication. Our team is relocating to the deep facility at Site Omega. The genetic samples and primary research data have already been transferred. This facility contains backup copies and secondary systems that may prove useful if Site Omega is compromised. The doctor's expression grew more intense, addressing her future audience with direct urgency. To any Sentinel units who find this message, your priority must now shift from mere protection to active propagation of the immune genetic patterns. The carriers must not only survive, but must contribute to repopulation efforts in safe zones. Their immunity must be passed to future generations if humanity is to have any hope of recovery. Arlene glanced at Cyane, whose face remained carefully neutral as she watched her creator's final instructions. Site Omega's coordinates are encoded in your genetic memory, the doctor continued, accessible through deep meditation protocols. If you have lost this ability due to damage or degradation, the coordinates are also stored in the central database of this facility, accessible via your authentication markers. The holographic figure seemed to look directly at them now, her recorded gaze somehow finding them across the decades. Remember your purpose, Sentinels. You were created not merely as guardians, but as shepherds for humanity's future. In your care rests the hope of our species. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. And know that whatever becomes of us, you were our finest creation, not weapons but protectors. Remember that distinction. The message ended, the hologram flickering out and leaving the chamber in silence, broken only by the soft hum of equipment. Arlen processed the message slowly, its implications unfolding in his mind. Site Omega, another facility presumably better hidden and more extensive than this one. Yes, Cyane's voice was unusually quiet. The true sanctuary. This facility was always meant to be secondary, a waypoint rather than a destination. And these deep meditation protocols, she mentioned genetic memory. Cyane turned to face him fully. Sentinel units were designed with encoded information data stored within our cellular structure rather than in conventional memory systems. Impossible to extract or copy, accessible only through specific cognitive states. That's how you've known where to find these facilities, Arlen realized. Not from research or exploration, but from information literally built into you. She nodded. Some information was immediate conscious knowledge from activation. Other data was designed to emerge over time, or in response to specific triggers or situations. Arlen's gaze returned to the now empty platform where Dr. Voss's image had stood. She said, my immunity, the genetic pattern I carry, is even more important than they initially believed. That it needs to be propagated for humanity's recovery. Yes, Cyane moved to another console, activating a different display. And now, we can verify exactly what your genetic pattern offers that makes it so valuable. The new display showed a complex genetic sequence, highlighted sections pulsing gently to draw attention to specific areas. This is the basic human genome, Cyane explained. And these highlighted sections show the mutations that confer immunity to the biogenetic weapons deployed during the war. The display shifted, zooming in on one particular sequence. Most immune individuals carry partial resistance effective against some agents, but vulnerable to others. But this pattern, she gestured to the highlighted section. This confers comprehensive immunity across all known variants. It's exceedingly rare, present in less than 1 in 10 million individuals. And I carry this pattern, Arlen stated, rather than asked. Yes, Cyane's expression softened slightly. Your specific variant is the most complete we've documented. Not just resistance, but complete immunity, with additional markers suggesting enhanced cellular repair when exposed to contaminants. Arlen stared at the display, trying to reconcile his sense of self with this new information that his very DNA made him uniquely valuable in ways that had shaped his entire life without his knowledge. This is why I was constantly sent into contaminated zones, he said quietly. Why I survived missions that killed others. They were using me as a test subject. Yes and no, Cyane replied. They were confirming your immunity, documenting its effectiveness in field conditions. But they were also deliberately exposing you to increasing levels of contamination, trying to determine your limits, if any existed. Human experimentation, Arlen said, disgust evident in his voice. Without consent. The ethics were compromised. After the war, Cyane acknowledged. Survival became the priority, often at the expense of principles. Arlen turned away from the display, the weight of revelation settling heavily upon him. His entire military career, the missions, the commendations, the respect he'd earned, all built atop a foundation of deception. He hadn't been valued for his skills or courage, but for the genetic quirk that made his body a valuable research subject. What now? He asked, finally facing Cyane again. Your creator says I need to propagate my genetic pattern. Become a breeding specimen. The bitter edge in his voice was unmistakable. Cyane regarded him steadily, her purple eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that transcended her clinical demeanor. Dr. Voss's message was recorded at the height of desperation, she said, when extinction seemed inevitable and desperate measures appeared justified. But we have options now that didn't exist then. She moved to yet another console, activating a different set of equipment. A cylindrical chamber hummed to life, interior lights illuminating what appeared to be medical sampling equipment. This facility contains technology for genetic sampling and preservation, Cyane explained. Your immune pattern can be documented and stored without requiring traditional propagation methods. Something like relief crossed Arlen's features, though the sense of being reduced to his genetic value still rankled. And this site Omega, what's there that makes it so important? According to my encoded knowledge, it contains the most comprehensive genetic repository ever assembled. Samples of human DNA from before the war, untainted by radiation or biogenetic contamination. The complete research archives of Project Sentinel, and most importantly, prototype treatment systems that could potentially use immune genetic patterns like yours to develop therapeutic interventions for contaminated populations. A cure, Arlen said softly. For the radiation sickness, the biogenetic poisoning. Potentially, Cyane cautioned. The technology was theoretical when this facility was abandoned. But with 27 years of automated research continuation, significant advances may have been made. The possibility hung between them, a purpose larger than either of them individually, a chance to address the suffering that plagued what remained of humanity in the wasteland above. How far to Site Omega? Arlen asked, decision forming in his mind. Approximately 1,200 kilometers southwest, deep in territory currently claimed by the Western Coalition. Arlen nodded mentally, calculating the challenges such a journey would present. Hostile territory, military pursuit, environmental hazards, a daunting prospect, but not impossible. Before we commit to that journey, Cyane continued, gesturing to the cylindrical chamber, we should secure samples of your genetic material here, a backup in case we don't reach Site Omega. The process was quick and painless automated systems, extracting blood and tissue samples that were immediately processed and preserved in the facility's storage systems. As Arlen watched the technology at work, a question that had been forming in his mind finally crystallized. You said Sentinels were assigned to protect specific genetic lines, not individuals, he noted. How long have you been watching over my family? Cyane was silent for a moment, something complicated passing across her features. I was assigned to your genetic line approximately 42 years ago during the early stages of the war. My initial subject was a woman named Alara Cade, a researcher working on early contamination countermeasures. My grandmother, Arlen realized. I never knew her. She died before I was born. She was brilliant, Cyane said, unexpected warmth entering her voice, and courageous beyond measure. When her research facility was targeted in an attack, she saved 3 colleagues at the cost of significant radiation exposure to herself. I was unable to prevent her exposure, but I ensured she received treatment that allowed her to survive long enough to bear a child. My father. Cyane nodded. Marcus Cade. I protected him through childhood and early adulthood, though he never knew of my existence. When he joined the military, my task became more challenging, especially during his deployment to contaminated zones. But he survived, met your mother, and you were born. The personal history generations of his family, under the watchful protection of the blue-skinned woman before him, shifted Arlen's perception, yet again. This wasn't simply about genetic patterns or military experimentation. It was about a continuous thread of protection, extending back to before his birth, a connection that transcended the clinical language of genetic lines and immune patterns. You've been protecting my family for more than 4 decades, he said quietly. Longer than I've been alive. It is my purpose, CNA replied simply. Not merely my function or my mission, but the core of my existence. The subtle distinction seemed important to her, Arlen noted. Not just a program directive, but an essential aspect of her identity protection as vocation, rather than mere assignment. As the genetic sampling process completed, a thought occurred to Arlen. All those times you saved my life in the field, the luck my fellow soldiers talked about. Why didn't you ever reveal yourself? Why remain a shadow? Several reasons, Cyane answered, shutting down the sampling equipment. Initially, maintaining distance was protocol. Sentinels were designed to protect without interference in normal life patterns. Later, as tensions between enhanced and standard humans grew, revealing myself would have endangered both of us. And eventually, she hesitated, then continued with careful precision. Eventually, I determined that knowledge of my existence would fundamentally alter your development as an individual. You needed to believe in your own agency, your own capabilities, even if I occasionally intervened in lethal situations. It was perhaps the most human explanation she had given, a recognition that protection extended beyond physical survival to encompass psychological well-being and personal growth. And now, Arlen asked, now that I know everything? Now we adapt, she replied simply. My purpose remains, but the parameters have changed. We are now partners in survival rather than guardian and ward. The redefinition felt right to Arlen, an evolution of their relationship that respected both his newfound knowledge and her unchanged commitment. They spent the next several hours exploring the facility more thoroughly, gathering supplies and information that would be crucial for their journey to Site Omega. The facility's stores included preserved food, medical supplies, and even weapons more advanced than standard military issue, all designed to remain viable for decades in storage. Most valuable, however, was the information. Cyane downloaded the facility's research archives into portable storage devices, ensuring they would have access to the accumulated knowledge even after they departed. Maps of territories that had once been nations' data on contamination zones, and their specific hazards records of other facilities that might offer shelter or resources along their route. As they prepared for departure, Arlen found himself drawn to a section of the facility they hadn't yet explored, a residential area where the researchers had lived during the war years. Personal quarters, common areas, even a small garden sustained by artificial lighting and recycled water. Evidence of lives interrupted, research abandoned in haste as the situation deteriorated. In one room, larger than the others, likely belonging to a senior researcher, Arlen discovered a physical journal, its pages yellowed, but preserved in the controlled environment. The handwriting was tight and precise, the entries documenting the final days before evacuation to Site Omega. One passage caught his attention. Sentinel units continue to exceed expectations, particularly S-37 CNA designation. Emotional development proceeding alongside enhanced cognitive functions, perhaps an unintended consequence of the empathic connection protocols, but potentially beneficial for long-term psychological stability. She has formed a particularly strong bond with her assigned subject, showing protective behaviors beyond baseline programming. When questioned, she stated simply, "Protection without understanding is mere mechanics. I wish to protect her because I understand her value, not merely because I am instructed to do so." Such philosophical distinctions were not part of original design parameters, suggesting an evolution of consciousness that bears further study, if time permits, which seems increasingly unlikely. Arlen closed the journal carefully, processing this glimpse into Cyane's origins. Not merely a design protector, but a being capable of emotional connection, of philosophical distinction, an artificial intelligence that had evolved beyond its original parameters to something more complex, more human. When he returned to the central chamber, CNA was finalizing their preparations, organizing supplies with military efficiency. She glanced up as he entered, something in his expression causing her to pause. "You found Dr. Voss's quarters?" she stated, rather than asked. "And her journal," Arlen confirmed. "She wrote about you specifically, about your development beyond original parameters." Cyane's expression remained neutral, but Arlen had learned to recognize the subtle indicators of her emotional states, the slight tension at the corners of her eyes, the almost imperceptible shift in posture. "Dr. Voss was perceptive," Cyane acknowledged, "and more concerned with my psychological development than most of her colleagues who focused primarily on physical capabilities and tactical functions." "She seemed to care about you," Arlen observed. "Not just as a project, but as a being." "Yes." Something soft entered Cyane's voice. "She was the closest thing to a mother I experienced. She advocated for my autonomy when others would have imposed stricter controls. She believed that true protection required understanding empathy, not merely programmed directives." It was the most personal information Cyane had shared about herself, a glimpse behind the clinical exterior to the sentient being beneath. Arlen found himself wondering how much of her apparent detachment was inherent, and how much was protective armor built over decades of isolation and purpose. "We should depart soon," Cyane said, returning to their preparations. "Military search patterns will eventually expand to include this region, and our stolen transport has likely been discovered by now." Arlen nodded in agreement, shouldering a pack filled with essential supplies. "How do we get to Site Omega? 1,200 kilometers of hostile territory isn't exactly a casual stroll. There are underground transit systems connecting some of the major research facilities," Cyane explained. "Not continuous, but extensive enough to cover significant portions of the journey. For the remaining sections, we'll need to acquire transportation as we go." "More hijacking of military vehicles?" Arlen asked with a hint of wry humor. "If necessary, though civilian transport would attract less attention." They made final preparations to leave the facility, securing systems to preserve their functionality for potential future use. As Cyane activated the sequence to return the facility to dormant status, Arlen found himself reflecting on the extraordinary changes of the past days, from dedicated military scout to fugitive, from ignorant test subject to conscious carrier of humanity's potential salvation. And through it all, the blue-skinned woman who had protected him and his family for decades, without recognition or gratitude, who had been hunted as an enemy while fulfilling the most noble of purposes. Ready. Cyane asked, the facility's lights beginning to dim around them as power systems shifted to minimal maintenance levels. Ready. Arlen confirmed, shouldering his weapon and adjusting his pack. Whatever lay ahead, whatever challenges awaited them on the journey to Site Omega, they would face them together, protector, and protected now, united in common purpose. They departed the facility, as they had arrived through the hidden entrance disguised as natural rock formation. As the door sealed behind them, returning to its perfect camouflage, Arlen took one last look at the invisible repository of knowledge and technology, one small bastion of hope buried beneath the wasteland. Then, guided by Cyane's encoded knowledge of the terrain, they set out toward the southwest, the first steps of a journey that would either end in failure and death, or perhaps, just perhaps, a new beginning for what remained of humanity. 3 days into their journey, disaster struck. They had been making good progress utilizing the underground tunnel systems Cyane knew from her encoded memory, emerging only when necessary to navigate between access points. The terrain was challenging, but manageable, the greater concern being potential pursuit from military forces still searching for them. They had stopped to rest in what appeared to be an abandoned monitoring station, a small underground facility once used to track environmental conditions in the surrounding region. Arlen was checking their supplies, while Cyane accessed the station's dormant systems, attempting to download any useful data about nearby areas. The attack came without warning, the ceiling of the monitoring station suddenly collapsing as explosive charges detonated above them. Debris rained down, filling the air with choking dust and the groaning of failing structural supports. "Ambush!" Arlen shouted, drawing his weapon as he sought cover behind a console. Cyane moved with inhuman speed, placing herself between Arlen and the largest section of collapsing ceiling. The impact as tons of concrete and steel struck her was audible even over the chaos of the collapse, a sickening sound of tremendous force meeting flesh and bone. Through the settling dust, Arlen saw figures rappelling down through the breach in the ceiling, tactical gear masked faces, weapons designed for lethality rather than capture. The same distinctive insignia he had glimpsed on the attackers at Phobie Meridian. He fired immediately, dropping the first attacker before they fully descended. The second and third took cover, returning fire that forced Arlen to duck behind the increasingly unstable console. "Cyane," he called out, unable to see her through the dust and debris. No response. Only the continued sounds of the attacking force deploying into the confined space of the monitoring station. Arlen assessed his options quickly. The attackers had the advantage of numbers and position. His cover was deteriorating with each passing second. And Cyane, his protector, his ally, was unaccounted for, possibly severely injured or worse. Tactical training took over. He tossed a concussive grenade toward the rappel lines, the explosion momentarily disorienting the attackers and providing cover as he changed position. 3 quick shots dispatched another attacker, but there were more, at least 6, that he could count, with potentially more above. A bullet grazed his shoulder, the impact spinning him partially around, but not penetrating his tactical gear. Arlen returned fire, then used the last of his concussive grenades to clear a path toward where he had last seen Cyane. The dust was beginning to settle, visibility improving marginally. What he saw sent a chill through him, despite the adrenaline of combat. Cyane lay partially buried beneath a massive section of collapsed ceiling, only her upper body visible. Her blue skin was ashen dark fluid that might have been blood seeping from multiple wounds. But most alarmingly, she was completely still. "Target the priority asset," a voice called from the attacking force. "Neutrino charges authorized. Neutrino charges, experimental weapons designed to disrupt neural patterns, particularly effective against enhanced beings like Cyane. Lethal, painful, and considered too inhumane even for standard military use." Rage surged through Arlen, cold and clarifying. These weren't standard military forces. This was something else, a specialized unit with knowledge of Cyane's physiology and a clear intent to terminate rather than capture. He fought with methodical precision, each shot carefully placed, each movement calculated for maximum effectiveness, with minimal exposure. 3 more attackers fell to his fire, but the remaining forces were closing in, coordinating their movements with professional discipline. A gap appeared in their formation, momentary, but sufficient. Arlen used it to sprint towards Cyane's position, sliding the last few meters as bullets tracked his movement. Reaching her side, he frantically began clearing debris, trying to assess her condition while maintaining awareness of the ongoing attack. "Cyane," he urged, voice low and intense. "I need you to respond. We're under attack." Her eyelids fluttered, purple irises briefly visible before closing again. She was alive, but severely injured, far worse than after her capture in the wasteland. "Perimeter secure, moving to terminate targets," the lead attacker announced, advancing with weapons raised. Arlen placed himself between Cyane and the approaching threat weapon, ready, though he knew the odds were insurmountable. If this was the end, he would meet it, protecting the woman who had spent decades protecting him. The lead attacker paused, studying Arlen through the tactical mask that concealed all features except cold, evaluating eyes. "Lieutenant Arlen Cade," the figure stated, voice distorted by filtration systems. "You are hereby declared a biological asset of strategic importance. Surrender for extraction, and your life will be preserved." "And her," Arlen demanded, gesturing to Cyane's broken form. "The Sentinel unit is scheduled for termination. Its existence represents a security breach and technology violation." "She," Arlen corrected, anger hardening his voice. "Not it. And she's under my protection." The lead attacker seemed to consider this, head tilting slightly, in what might have been amusement. Ironic, the protected becoming protector, a gesture to the remaining tactical team. "Take him alive. Terminate the Sentinel." They advanced as one, disciplined and lethal. Arlen fired his remaining ammunition, dropping one, but barely slowing the others. He reached for Cyane's weapon, determined to make their victory as costly as possible. A sound like tearing fabric cut through the tension, a strange rippling distortion in the air above the attacking force. Before anyone could react, a brilliant energy pulse erupted from the distortion, engulfing the tactical team in blinding light. When it faded, seconds later, the attackers lay motionless on the ground, weapons unfired, postures suggesting they had been neutralized mid-motion. Through the same spatial distortion, figures descended, humanoid, but clearly not standard military. Their protective gear shimmered with technology beyond anything Arlen had encountered, and they moved with the same fluid grace that characterized Cyane's movements. "More Sentinels. Secure the perimeter," one ordered, voice melodic despite the crisp command. "Medical intervention team to the damaged Sentinel." Arlen maintained his defensive position over Cyane weapon, still raised despite recognizing potential allies. "Identify yourselves," he demanded. The apparent leader approached, removing a helmet to reveal skin the color of burnished copper and eyes of startling silver. "I am Terai, Sentinel Unit S-29. We detected the attack on our sister unit and responded." The silver eyes assessed Arlen with open curiosity. "You are the genetic carrier she protects." Arlen Cade. He confirmed, lowering his weapon slightly, but remaining positioned between them and Cyane. "She needs medical attention immediately." Terai nodded, gesturing to others who approached with equipment Arlen didn't recognize. "Our medical protocols are specifically designed for Sentinel physiology. Please allow us access." After a moment's hesitation, Arlen moved aside, though he remained close, watching intently, as the rescue team worked on Cyane's broken body. Their methods were unlike any medical procedures he had witnessed, energy fields that seemed to realign damaged tissues, devices that interfaced directly with her cellular structure, compounds that glowed with bioluminescence as they were administered. "The damage is severe," one of the medical team reported to Terai. Spinal disruption, internal hemorrhaging, cellular degradation from the impact compression. She requires full regeneration protocols. Can she be stabilized for transport? Tarai asked. Temporarily, but full recovery requires the facilities at Haven. Tarai nodded, then turned to Arlen. We must move quickly. Our presence will draw additional forces, and this position is compromised. Haven, Arlen questioned. Is that another name for Site Omega? Surprise flickered across Tarai's copper features. You know of Omega Cyane shared classified information with you? Not voluntarily at first, Arlen explained quickly. We were heading there when we were ambushed. She believes the facility contains technology that could help develop treatments using my genetic immunity. Tarai studied him with renewed interest. You carry the comprehensive immunity pattern. Now I understand why her protection protocols were so absolute. A decision seemed to form. You will accompany us to Haven, both for your safety and because your genetic pattern may indeed be valuable to our ongoing work. As they prepared for evacuation, the medical team carefully extracting Cyane from the debris and transferring her to a specialized transport device, Arlen remained close, unwilling to be separated from her, despite the apparent alliance with these new sentinels. Will she recover? He asked one of the medical team watching as they worked to stabilize Cyane for transport. The sentinel's skin, a deep green, rather than blue or copper, glanced up at him with eyes of amber gold. Her core functions remain intact, which is promising, but the damage is extensive. Recovery will depend on how quickly we can begin full regeneration protocols. And these protocols are at Haven. How far is that? Not far in distance, the Green Sentinel replied, though reaching it presents challenges. Before Arlen could inquire further, Tarai approached again. We're ready for departure. The tactical team has been neutralized and their communication systems disabled, but reinforcements will be incoming. We need to move now. The evacuation proceeded with military precision. Cyane's unconscious form, secured in the specialized transport device, the rescue team forming a protective formation around her and Arlen. They ascended through the breach in the ceiling, emerging into the wasteland, above where Arlen was startled to see an aircraft unlike any he had encountered before. Sleek, silent with propulsion systems that seemed to bend light around its contours. Sentinel transport, Tarai explained, noting his surprise. Designed for stealth and speed. The military has been attempting to reverse engineer our technology for decades, with limited success. Inside the craft was equally advanced medical systems, integrated directly into the transport bay, where Cyane was secured monitoring equipment, displaying her vital signs in a format Arlen couldn't fully interpret. The Sentinels moved with coordinated efficiency, preparing for departure, even as the medical team continued working on their injured comrade. Arlen found himself directed to a seat near Cyane's position, allowing him to remain close, while staying clear of the ongoing medical interventions. As he strapped in, Tarai took the adjacent seat. You have questions, the copper-skinned sentinel observed. More than I can count, Arlen admitted, starting with who you are and how you found us. We are what remains of the Sentinel program, Tarai explained, as the craft lifted silently into the air. 14 units still operational protecting our assigned genetic lines, while maintaining Haven as our central base of operations. And Haven is the facility you know as Site Omega. We renamed it after the war when it became clear that survival would require more than mere preservation of knowledge. It needed to become a sanctuary, a haven for both Sentinels and the genetic lines we protect. The craft accelerated its advanced propulsion system, creating no perceptible force despite the speed Arlen could see they were achieving. The wasteland blurred beneath them, distance being consumed at a rate that would have been impossible in conventional military aircraft. As for how we found you, Tarai continued, Sentinels maintain a neural network connection, subtle but persistent. When Cyane was severely injured, her distress signal activated automatically. We were already monitoring increased military activity in this region, and had placed reconnaissance units nearby as a precaution. These attackers, Arlen, gestured to his shoulder where the bullet had grazed him. They weren't standard military. Who were they? Terai's expression darkened slightly. A specialized division known internally as Chimera Unit. They hunt enhanced beings, particularly Sentinels, for termination and technology extraction. They're sanctioned by military leadership but operate outside normal command structures. Captain Rylan, Arlen muttered. He must be connected to them. The name is familiar, Terai acknowledged. Intelligence Division specializing in biogenetic research. Yes, he has been identified as a liaison between standard military operations and Chimera Unit activities. The pieces continued falling into place for Arlen. The determination to neural strip CNA, rather than conventional interrogation, the speed with which pursuit had been organized, the specialized knowledge of sentinel physiology that the attackers had demonstrated. How severe are her injuries? He asked. Gaze returning to Cyane's still form, medical sentinels, still working to stabilize her condition. Terai's silver eyes reflected genuine concern. Critical. The impact compromised her spinal structure and crushed several vital organs. Her regenerative capabilities are attempting to compensate, but the damage exceeds their capacity without external support. But she'll recover at Haven with your regeneration protocols. If we reach Haven in time, Terai replied, the careful precision of the statement containing its own warning. Sentinel physiology is resilient, but not indestructible. There are thresholds beyond which even our advanced recovery systems cannot reverse damage. The gravity of the situation settled heavily upon Arlen. Cyane, who had protected him and his family for decades, who had risked everything to preserve his life, now depended on him and these newly appeared sentinels for her survival. How much longer to Haven? He asked. Approximately 47 minutes at current speed. We're taking an indirect route to avoid military detection systems. Arlen nodded, then moved from his seat to kneel beside Cyane's transport platform, ignoring the disapproving glance from one of the medical sentinels. He took her hand cold, the blue of her skin alarmingly pale, and leaned close to her ear. Hold on, he whispered, squeezing her hand gently. Just a little longer. You protected me all these years. Now it's my turn to protect you. Whether it was imagination or reality, he thought he felt the faintest pressure in return, her fingers tightening almost imperceptibly around his. A sign of fight, of resilience, of the determination that had kept her following her purpose through decades of isolation and danger. As the Sentinel craft raced toward Haven, Arlen maintained his vigil at Cyane's side. Roles reversed as protector, became protected. The unfamiliar position of guardian, fitting him, like a uniform he had always been meant to wear. Haven materialized on the horizon, exactly as Terai had described it, a sanctuary hidden in plain sight. From a distance, it appeared to be nothing more than a natural geological formation, a mesa rising from the wasteland with steep sides and a flat top. Only as they approached did Arlen begin to discern the subtle indications of design, rather than natural development angles, too precise surfaces, too uniform despite weathering. The entire mesa is the facility, he asked, watching as they approached a section of the formation that was opening like a massive hangar door, perfectly concealed when closed. The visible portion, yes, Terai confirmed. The majority extends deep underground, utilizing natural cavern systems expanded and reinforced over decades of development. The craft entered the concealed hangar, settling onto a landing platform with barely perceptible contact. Immediately, additional sentinels approached, some with the same distinctive colored skin as Terai, and the rescue team others with more subtle variations that nonetheless marked them as enhanced beings rather than standard humans. Medical team to Regeneration Chamber 1, Terai ordered as the craft's hatch opened. Priority protocols authorized for S-37. Cyane was transferred to a more sophisticated medical platform, the attending sentinels moving with coordinated urgency that spoke to the severity of her condition. Arlen followed closely, unwilling to be separated from her, despite the unfamiliar surroundings and the curious glances his human presence attracted. They proceeded through corridors that merged advanced technology with aesthetic design, living plants integrated with monitoring systems, natural stone, alongside transparent display surfaces, an environment that felt more like a sanctuary than a military installation or research facility. The regeneration chamber proved to be a circular room dominated by a central platform, surrounded by technology unfamiliar to Arlen, despite his extensive military experience. Cyane was transferred to this platform, medical sentinels working swiftly to connect her to systems that seemed to interface directly with her cellular structure. "You must remain outside during the procedure," a sentinel informed Arlen as he attempted to follow Cyane into the chamber. The energetic fields would be harmful to unmodified human physiology. Though reluctant, Arlen nodded in understanding, watching through a transparent section of wall as the medical team initiated the regeneration protocol. The chamber, filled with a luminescent mist that obscured his view of CNA's form, pulses of energy, visible as distortions in the misty atmosphere. The process requires approximately 3 hours for initial stabilization, Tarai explained, appearing at Arlen's side. "During this time, I suggest you allow our medical team to evaluate your condition as well. You've sustained injuries that require attention." Arlen had almost forgotten the bullet graze on his shoulder and various contusions from the collapsed monitoring station. Compared to Cyane's critical state, they had seemed insignificant. "Will she recover?" he asked, not moving from his position at the observation wall. "The initial readings are concerning," Tarai admitted. "But Cyane has always demonstrated exceptional resilience, even among sentinels. If recovery is possible, she will find her way back." The careful phrasing did not escape Arlen's notice, not a promise of recovery, but an acknowledgement of possibility tempered by CNA's particular strength. It was both hopeful and devastating in its honesty. "Come," Tarai urged gently. "There is nothing you can do here now, and your own condition requires assessment, especially given the genetic pattern you carry." Reluctantly, Arlen allowed himself to be led to a different medical area, where sentinels with specialized knowledge of human physiology examined his injuries and overall condition. The bullet graze was cleaned and treated with advanced healing compounds that immediately reduced pain and accelerated tissue regeneration. Various diagnostic systems evaluated his exposure to radiation and biogenetic contaminants from their journey through the wasteland. "Remarkable," one of the medical sentinels commented, reviewing his scan results. "The immunity pattern is even more comprehensive than our records indicated. Not merely resistance, but active neutralization of contaminants upon exposure." "Is that unusual?" Arlen asked. "Unprecedented," the sentinel replied. "Most immune patterns provide passive resistance, preventing cellular damage, but not actively counteracting the contaminants themselves. Your system appears to transform harmful agents into neutral or even beneficial compounds." This explained much about his military career, not just survival in contaminated zones, but his enhanced recovery afterward, the absence of symptoms that plagued other scouts, even when they survived exposure. After the medical assessment, Tarai escorted Arlen to quarters that had been prepared for him, comfortable accommodations that again balanced functionality with aesthetic considerations. Food was provided, actual fresh food, rather than the preserved rations he had subsisted on for years in the field, along with clean clothing and basic necessities. "Rest," Tarai advised. "I will inform you personally when there is news of CNA's condition." But rest proved elusive. Despite physical exhaustion and the comfortable surroundings, Arlen's mind refused to quiet. Too much had changed too quickly: his understanding of himself, his relationship with Cyane, his place in the world. And underneath it all, the gnawing worry for the blue-skinned woman who had sacrificed herself to protect him yet again. After an hour of restless attempts at sleep, Arlen left his quarters determined to return to the regeneration chamber. The corridors of Haven were quiet, but not deserted occasional sentinels, acknowledging him with curious nods as he passed. None attempted to prevent his movement, suggesting Tarai had authorized his freedom within the facility. The regeneration chamber remained active when he arrived, the luminescent mist still obscuring direct view of Cyane's form on the central platform. A single sentinel monitored the process from a control station nearby, glancing up as Arlen approached. "Lieutenant Cade," the sentinel greeted him. "Tarai indicated you might return despite recommendations for rest." "How is she?" Arlen asked simply. The sentinel's skin, a deep indigo eyes, a startling white, consulted the monitoring systems. "Stability has improved marginally. Cellular regeneration has initiated in priority systems, but the core damage remains severe." "May I stay?" Arlen gestured to a seating area near the observation wall. "I won't interfere with the process." The indigo sentinel considered him for a moment, then nodded. "Your presence may be beneficial, actually. There is evidence that sentinel units maintain awareness of their assigned humans, even during regenerative states. Cyane may sense your proximity." Arlen took a seat facing the chamber, settling in for what he expected would be a long vigil. To his surprise, the sentinel monitoring the process joined him after a few minutes. "I am Nevin," the indigo sentinel introduced himself. "I was created in the same sequence as Cyane, what humans might consider siblings, though our relationship is more complex than biological equivalence." "You've known her a long time then," Arlen observed. "Since activation," Nevin confirmed. "Though our paths diverged during the war when our assigned genetic lines were deployed to different regions. We reconnected at Haven approximately 18 years ago when Cyane first made contact with the surviving Sentinel network. She's been alone for decades," Arlen realized, "protecting my family without support or connection to others like herself." Nevin's white eyes reflected a complex emotion. "Cyane has always been independent, even among Sentinels. When the primary facility was destroyed, many of us found each other relatively quickly, establishing Haven as a base of operations. But Cyane remained isolated, focused exclusively on her assigned mission with minimal contact." "Why?" Arlen asked. "Why not seek out others like herself?" "That is a question best answered by her," Nevin replied. "But observation suggests her commitment to her assigned genetic line. Your family transcended standard protective protocols. It became personal, in a way that most Sentinel-human relationships do not." The statement aligned with what Arlen had read in Dr. Voss's journal, that Cyane had developed beyond her baseline programming, forming connections that hadn't been anticipated by her creators. That she protected, not merely from duty, but from understanding, and perhaps something approaching care. "Will she tell me herself?" Arlen asked quietly. "Or is that optimism at this point?" Nevin's gaze returned to the monitoring systems. "The next few hours will be critical. If her core systems stabilize sufficiently to support consciousness, recovery becomes significantly more probable. Until then." He left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. They sat in companionable silence thereafter, Nevin occasionally adjusting parameters in the regeneration protocols, while Arlen maintained his vigil. Hours passed, the luminescent mist in the chamber gradually shifting from pale blue to a deeper indigo as the process progressed. Arlen must have dozed despite his intentions to remain awake, because he startled when Tarai's voice broke the silence. "Lieutenant Cade, there has been a development." Fully alert instantly, Arlen stood to face the copper-skinned sentinel. "Cyane, the regeneration protocols have reached a critical phase," Tarai explained. "Her core systems have stabilized enough to attempt consciousness restoration, but the process is encountering resistance. Her neural patterns are fragmenting." "What does that mean?" Arlen demanded, fear sharpening his tone. "It means," Nevin interjected, "that her mind is losing cohesion. The physical structures are healing, but the consciousness that is Cyane is struggling to maintain integrity." "What can be done?" Arlen asked, desperation evident in his voice. Tarai and Nevin exchanged a look that contained volumes of unspoken communication. There is a procedure, Terai said finally. Rarely attempted, never with a non-sentinel participant. It would establish a temporary neural bridge between your consciousness and hers, creating an anchor point that might allow her fragmented patterns to realign. A mind link, Arlen translated, the implications immediately apparent. You want to connect my mind to hers? Yes, Neven confirmed. But the process carries significant risks, particularly for you. Human neural architecture is not designed for such connections. The strain could cause damage to your own cognitive functions. But it might save her? It might, Terai acknowledged. The connection between a sentinel and their assigned human is unique, a frequency that resonates at a fundamental level. If anything can provide the anchor she needs, it would be your neural pattern. Arlen didn't hesitate. Do it. Lieutenant Cade Arlen, Terai's tone grew more personal. You must understand the full risk. If Cyane's consciousness fails while you are connected, the neural backlash could cause permanent damage to your mind. In extreme cases, it could be fatal. I understand, Arlen replied, his decision unwavering. She's spent her entire existence protecting me. I won't abandon her now when she needs protection in return. Something like respect flickered in Terai's silver eyes. Then we will prepare the procedure immediately. Time is critical. The preparation was brief, but thorough. Arlen was connected to monitoring systems that would track his vital signs and neural activity during the procedure. A specialized neural interface was fitted to his temples, designed to translate his human thought patterns into forms compatible with Sentinel neural architecture. The connection will feel invasive. At first, Neven explained, as they made final adjustments. Your instinct will be to resist, to protect your mind from what feels like intrusion. You must fight that instinct, allow the connection to form fully. What will I experience? Arlen asked, seated now on a platform positioned adjacent to the regeneration chamber, separated only by the transparent barrier. That varies by individual, Terai replied. Some report sensory experiences, visual, auditory, tactile impressions from the Sentinel's consciousness. Others describe more abstract awareness, emotional states, fragmented memories, core concepts that define the Sentinel's identity. Whatever you encounter, Neven added, remember that your purpose is to serve as an anchor. Project Stability coherence your own sense of self. This provides a reference point for the fragmented consciousness to reorganize around. Arlen nodded his understanding, focusing his thoughts on CNA, not just the clinical protector he had come to know in recent days, but the guardian who had watched over him and his family for decades. The being who had risked everything to preserve his life again and again without recognition or gratitude. We're ready, Terai announced. The connection will initiate in 3, 2, 1. The world dissolved around Arlen reality, fragmenting into shards of perception that bore no relation to physical space or time. The invasion Neven had warned about was immediate and overwhelming. Foreign thoughts, alien perceptions, a consciousness structured entirely differently from his own human mind. His instinct was indeed to resist, to erect barriers against this fundamental violation of self. But remembering the purpose, he fought against that primal reaction, deliberately opening his mind to the connection, accepting rather than rejecting. Gradually, the chaos began to organize, not into anything resembling normal human perception, but into patterns he could at least begin to comprehend. Colors that existed beyond the visual spectrum, sounds that vibrated through conceptual rather than physical space, emotions that had no human equivalents, yet resonated with fundamental meaning. And through it all, fragments of CNA, her essence, scattered across this virtual landscape, like reflections in broken glass. Each fragment contained some aspect of her, a memory, a purpose, a fundamental principle that defined her existence. But they were disconnected, drifting further apart with each passing moment. Anchor, Arlen reminded himself. I am her anchor. He focused on projecting his own cohesive self, not just his name or physical form, but the core of who he was. Soldier, protector, survivor. The carrier of a genetic legacy that had shaped his entire life without his knowledge. The human who had discovered truth and chosen to embrace purpose rather than succumb to bitterness. In the strange non-space of their connected consciousness, Arlen sensed a response tentative at first, then stronger. The scattered fragments of CNA began to slow their dispersal, some even drawing closer together, attracted to the stable reference point his mind provided. Encouraged, Arlen intensified his effort, focusing particularly on memories they shared the moment of her capture in the wasteland, their escape from FOB Meridian, the revelations at the research facility, concrete connections that linked them specifically uniquely. The response grew stronger. Fragments coalesced, forming larger patterns that began to resemble cohesive thought. In this shared consciousness, Arlen sensed something like recognition, not visual or auditory, but a fundamental awareness that transcended sensory perception. "Shanae, come back, find your way back." The thought wasn't verbalized in any conventional sense, but the intention projected clearly into their shared mental space. And from the increasingly organized patterns came a response, not words, but a concept that translated in Arlen's mind as a single, powerful affirmation. Purpose. This core concept seemed to act as a catalyst, drawing remaining fragments toward it, like metal to a magnet. Purpose. The fundamental principle that defined Cyane's existence. Not merely programming or directive, but chosen identity. Protector. Not because she was designed to be, but because she had embraced this role as essential to herself. With this central organizing principle, restored, the remaining fragments aligned with increasing speed, forming a coherent pattern that Arlen recognized as distinctly, uniquely Cyane, not human, but undeniably person. As her consciousness stabilized, Arlen began to perceive more clearly through the connection, not just abstract patterns, but actual memories. Glimpses of his grandmother Alara through Cyane's eyes, a brilliant woman working tirelessly in a laboratory, much like the one they had discovered. His father as a child protected from radiation exposure during an evacuation that Cyane had subtly guided. His own birth witnessed from the shadows as Cyane maintained her silent vigil over the continuation of the genetic line she had sworn to protect. Decades of watching, intervening when necessary, but always from a distance, always unseen. The isolation of existence without connection, not merely to other sentinels, but to the very humans she protected. The choice to remain separate from the emerging sentinel community at Haven, because it would mean dividing her attention, potentially compromising her protective capacity. Years of being hunted as military awareness of her activities grew labeled enemy, when her only crime was preserving a life they valued only for its experimental potential. The pain of knowing that the human she had protected for so long now hunted her as a threat, believing the lies that painted her as assassin rather than guardian. And through it all, an unwavering commitment to purpose, a dedication that transcended programming that had evolved into something like devotion. Protection, not from obligation, but from choice, from understanding of value that extended beyond genetic patterns, to encompass the full humanity of those under her care. These revelations flooded Arlen's consciousness, overwhelming in their intensity and implication. But before he could fully process them, a new sensation interrupted the connection, beginning to disengage reality, reasserting itself as his mind separated from Cyane's now stabilized consciousness. The return to physical awareness was jarring sensory inputs, suddenly limited to normal human perception thoughts, confined to the architecture of his own brain, rather than spanning the expanded landscape of their shared consciousness. Arlen gasped as the neural interface disengaged, hands instinctively reaching for his temples, where phantom connections still seemed to linger. Nevin was at his side, immediately monitoring his condition, while Tarai oversaw a flurry of activity at the regeneration chamber controls. "Did it work?" Arlen asked, voice hoarse, as though he had been shouting, though he had made no physical sound during the procedure. "Yes," Nevin confirmed, relief evident in his tone. Her neural patterns have stabilized consciousness integrity, restored to viable levels. The physical regeneration protocols can proceed effectively now. Arlen's gaze moved to the chamber, where the luminescent mist had shifted color again now, a vibrant cyan that pulsed with regular rhythm. "She'll recover," he pressed, needing explicit confirmation. "The prognosis is now highly favorable," Tarai answered, approaching from the control station. "Full recovery will require time, but the critical threshold has been passed. You have done what we could not, Lieutenant Cade. You have brought her back from dissolution." The confirmation released tension. Arlen hadn't realized he was holding exhaustion crashing over him in a sudden wave that left him swaying on the platform. Neven steadied him with a supportive hand. "You require rest," the Indigo Sentinel stated. "The neural connection taxed your system beyond normal human parameters. Sleep is essential for your recovery." Arlen wanted to protest to remain until Cyane regained full consciousness, but his body was betraying him. Limbs, heavy thoughts increasingly sluggish as the adrenaline of the procedure faded. "I'll return as soon as she's conscious," he insisted, allowing Neven to help him stand. "You have my word," Tarai promised. "Now rest, Arlen Cade. You have earned it many times over." This time, sleep came instantly, as Arlen reached his quarters, his mind and body demanding recovery from the extraordinary strain of the neural connection. He dreamed in fragments, images and sensations from CNA's memories, intermingling with his own, creating a tapestry of shared experience that transcended their different natures. When he awoke, the chronometer indicated he had slept for nearly 14 hours. He felt surprisingly refreshed, though, with lingering echoes of the connection still resonating in his thoughts, concepts and perspectives that weren't native to human cognition, but had nonetheless left their impression. He had barely finished dressing when a chime announced a visitor at his quarters. Opening the door revealed Tarai, the copper-skinned Sentinel's expression confirming the news before words were spoken. "She's awake," Arlen stated rather than asked. "Yes," Tarai confirmed, "and asking for you." They proceeded through Haven's corridors. Arlen, noticing details he had been too preoccupied to observe, previously the integration of natural elements with advanced technology, the presence of other humans besides himself, the sense of true sanctuary rather than mere fortification. "There are other humans here," he noted, observing a group working in what appeared to be a hydroponic garden. "The genetic lines we protect," Tarai explained. "Some chose to relocate to Haven permanently after understanding their significance. Others come temporarily for medical treatment or genetic sampling, then return to their communities. All are aware of their importance and have chosen to participate in our preservation efforts." This confirmed what Arlen had begun to suspect, that Haven represented not merely a refuge for surviving Sentinels, but a collaborative effort between the enhanced Guardians and the humans they had been created to protect. Not subjects and protectors, but partners in survival. The regeneration chamber had been transformed when they arrived the central platform, now elevated to a more accessible position, the luminescent mist dispersed to reveal its occupant. Cyane sat upright, her blue skin vibrant rather than ashen purple eyes, alert as they tracked Arlen's entrance. 15 minutes, Tarai instructed the attending medical sentinels. "Her recovery still requires careful monitoring." Then, with surprising discretion, Tarai and the medical team withdrew, leaving Arlen and Cyane in relative privacy, despite the transparent walls of the chamber. Lieutenant Cyane greeted him, her voice stronger than Arlen had expected, given the severity of her injuries. After sharing consciousness, Arlen replied with the ghost of a smile, "I think you can use my first name." Something like humor flickered in her purple eyes. "Arlen, then." He approached the platform, noting the medical system still connected to her body, monitoring and supporting her ongoing recovery. Despite the technology surrounding her, she appeared remarkably whole, no visible evidence remaining of the crushing injuries she had sustained in the collapsed monitoring station. "How much do you remember?" he asked, uncertain how the fragmentation and restoration of her consciousness might have affected her memories. Everything, Cyane replied simply, including what we shared during the neural connection. The implication hung between them, that she was aware not only of his role in anchoring her fragmented consciousness, but also of what he had perceived of her memories, her isolation, her unwavering commitment to his protection, spanning decades. "You should have told me," Arlen said quietly, "about how long you've been watching over my family, about the choice to remain isolated from other sentinels to protect us more effectively. Would you have believed me?" Cyane asked, no challenge in her tone, merely curiosity. Before seeing the evidence at the research facility, before experiencing Haven and meeting other sentinels. "Probably not," Arlen admitted. "I was too thoroughly indoctrinated, too convinced of the military's version of reality. And now I understand," he said simply. "Not completely. I don't think a human mind can fully comprehend a sentinel's experience, but enough to know that what you did, what you endured, was beyond anything duty or programming could explain." Cyane's expression softened slightly. "The neural connection affected you. You're perceiving aspects of consciousness that standard human cognition typically cannot access. Is that bad?" "Unexpected," she corrected, "but potentially valuable, especially given the path ahead of us." "Which is what exactly?" Arlen asked. "Now that we've reached Haven, now that you're recovering, what comes next?" Cyane glanced toward the chamber entrance, where Tarai had reappeared, clearly monitoring the time limit placed on their conversation. "Healing first," she replied. "For both of us. Then decisions about how best to utilize your genetic pattern for the treatments Dr. Voss envisioned. Haven has continued her work all these years, developing countermeasures for the biogenetic contamination using immune patterns like yours. And us, Arlen, pressed the question encompassing more than he could easily articulate. What happens to us? Cyane met his gaze directly, purple eyes, reflecting a depth of understanding that transcended their different natures. That depends on choice, rather than protocol now. Your genetic pattern is here safe at Haven. The mission that defined my existence for decades is technically complete. And if I choose to remain here to help with developing these treatments, then I would remain as well, Cyane answered simply. Not because of programming or directive, but because after decades of protection, I find I have developed a preference for your continued well-being. The careful phrasing made Arlen smile, so characteristic of her precise way of expressing concepts that had no easy translation between their different forms of consciousness. "A preference," he repeated. "Is that sentinel for I've grown attached to you?" The faintest hint of a smile touched Cyane's blue lips. "Perhaps, though attachment implies limitations that don't accurately reflect the nature of the connection." "1 minute," Tarai called from the entrance, reminding them of the time constraint. Arlen nodded acknowledgement, then turned back to Cyane. "We'll have time to figure it out, all of it. The treatments Haven our future. But first you need to heal completely." "As do you," she pointed out. "The neural connection placed extraordinary strain on your consciousness. After effects may continue to manifest for several days." Always the protector, even from her recovery platform. The realization was both amusing and profoundly touching evidence that despite her clinical exterior, the care she had developed for him over decades remained fundamental to her nature. "I'll be fine," Arlen assured her. "Apparently I have excellent genes." The comment drew another small smile from CNA, a visible relaxation of her typically composed features. "Indeed you do. Worth protecting at all costs." Tarai approached now, indicating that their time was up. Arlen squeezed Cyane's hand gently before stepping back from the platform. "Rest," he told her, echoing the instruction so many had given him in recent days. "I'll be here when you're fully recovered." "I know," Cyane replied simply. "You have proven to be as dedicated a protector as I have been." The observation carried weight beyond the immediate circumstances' acknowledgement of his choice to risk his own consciousness, to save hers, to place himself between her and danger during the ambush, to defy military authority, and his own indoctrination for her sake. As Tarai escorted him from the chamber, Arlen glanced back one last time. Cyane was watching him, purple eyes, reflecting something he had rarely seen in their brief, conscious acquaintance piece. Not merely the absence of immediate threat, but a deeper tranquility that suggested wholeness, completion. The blue-skinned woman who had spent decades protecting him and his family was finally safe herself, surrounded by her own kind. Her purpose fulfilled, her existence acknowledged and valued rather than hunted. Whatever came next for them, that reality alone made all they had endured worthwhile. 6 months passed at Haven, a time of healing and discovery for both Arlen and Cyane. Her physical recovery progressed more rapidly than even the medical sentinels had anticipated, her remarkable resilience asserting itself once her consciousness had been stabilized through the neural connection. Within weeks, she was moving freely through Haven, gradually resuming normal activities as her strength returned. For Arlen, the adjustment to life at Haven presented different challenges. The neural connection had indeed left lasting effects, expanded perception, occasional flashes of insight that seemed to transcend standard human cognition, dreams that contained fragments of sentinel consciousness. But rather than finding these changes disturbing, Arlen embraced them as bridges between his human experience and Cyane's fundamentally different mode of being. His genetic pattern proved as valuable as hoped, providing the missing component that Haven's researchers had sought for decades. Blood and tissue samples were carefully processed, the unique properties of his comprehensive immunity analyzed and integrated into treatment protocols being developed for contaminated populations. The initial results are promising, Dr. Celine Veris reported during one of their regular briefings. A brilliant geneticist who had continued Dr. Voss's work at Haven, she had become Arlen's primary contact among the human researchers. The neutralizing properties of your immune response when integrated with our existing delivery systems show a 78% success rate in reversing early-stage contamination damage. And for advanced cases, Arlen asked, aware that many in the wasteland suffered from conditions long considered irreversible. Still limited, Dr. Veris admitted, but significantly better than anything previously developed. A 32% improvement in quality-of-life metrics, with some instances of partial reversal in supposedly permanent damage. It was hope, perhaps not the comprehensive cure they had initially dreamed of, but meaningful progress toward addressing the suffering that had defined post-war existence for so many. Throughout this process, Arlen and Cyane's relationship evolved in ways neither could have anticipated. The shared neural connection had created a foundation of understanding that transcended conventional communication, allowing each to perceive aspects of the other's experience that would otherwise have remained inaccessible. For Arlen, this meant gaining insight into Cyane's perspective, her perception of time that extended far beyond human scales, her understanding of purpose as essential, rather than acquired her experience of isolation during the decades she had spent protecting his family alone. For Cyane, the connection had provided something equally valuable, a first-hand experience of human emotion and perception contextualizing the behaviors she had observed but never fully comprehended. The subjective experience of fear, hope, loyalty, and purpose from a human perspective gave depth to her understanding of those she had been created to protect. They spent hours in conversation exploring these differences and commonalities, building a relationship that existed in the uncharted territory between their different natures. Not quite friendship in human terms, not the duty-bound connection of sentinel to assigned human, but something unique that honored both while transcending conventional categories. On the evening marking 6 months since their arrival at Haven, they stood together on an observation platform overlooking the wasteland below. The facility's position atop the mesa provided extraordinary visibility, the desolation stretching to the horizon in all directions, yet somehow beautiful in the light of the setting sun. The first treatment protocols will be deployed next week, Arlen noted, breaking a comfortable silence. Dr. Veris says they're ready for field testing in the settlement at the eastern perimeter. Cyane nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. A significant milestone. Dr. Voss would have been pleased to see her work finally realized. Will you accompany the deployment team? Arlen asked. It would be the first time either of them had left Haven since their arrival, though for different reasons, his presence required for ongoing research, hers for continued recovery. Yes, Cyane confirmed. Both as security, and to monitor the treatment effects directly. The settlement has reported increased Chimera unit activity in the region. Additional protection may be necessary. The mention of Chimera unit, the specialized force that hunted sentinels and had nearly killed Cyane, sent a chill through Arlen, despite the warm evening. During their months at Haven, intelligence gathered by Sentinel reconnaissance teams had confirmed his suspicions about Captain Ryland's connection to the unit, as well as the broader military objective of capturing or eliminating all enhanced beings they considered technological assets. I'm coming with you, Arlen stated, the decision forming, even as he spoke it. Cyane turned to face him, fully, purple eyes studying his expression. The research team requires your presence for the next phase of development, and the settlement is in contested territory, high risk of military encounter. I'm not asking permission, Arlen clarified, a hint of humor in his tone. I'm informing you of my decision. The samples they need are already collected and preserved, and after 6 months of safety, I find I'm developing a taste for purpose beyond being a genetic donor. Something like pride flickered in Cyane's expression, subtle but unmistakable to Arlen, after months of learning to read her non-human emotional cues. Then we will need to review tactical protocols, she replied, accepting his decision without further argument. The deployment team departs in 3 days. As they continued their observation of the sunset, Arlen reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment from hunter and hunted to partners in a mission that might help heal the broken world spread before them. The military officer who had once pursued the Blue Ghost as an enemy now stood beside her as ally friend, and something more complex that defied simple definition. You knew this would happen, he said. Suddenly a realization formed from fragments of memory shared during their neural connection. Not the specifics, but the general outcome. You knew that eventually I would discover the truth, that our paths would align rather than oppose. Cyane was silent for a moment, considering his observation. Not knew, she clarified eventually. Hoped. There is a difference between predictive calculation and authentic hope. And yet you continued protecting me even when I was hunting you, Arlen pressed. Even when I was the direct threat to your existence. Yes. Why? The simple question contained volumes, not merely curiosity about strategy or duty, but a deeper inquiry into the nature of her commitment, the choices that had defined her existence. Cyane turned to face him fully, the setting sun casting her blue skin in shades of gold and amber. For once, her answer came not with clinical precision, but with simple, profound truth. Because protection without choice is merely function. Protection despite risk, despite opposition, despite pain, that is purpose. She held his gaze, something intensely personal visible in her expression. I protected you not because I was programmed to do so, but because I chose to. Because I understood your value, not merely your genetic pattern, but you. The distinction was everything, the difference between machine and person, between duty and devotion. It was the answer Arlen had been seeking since the moment she whispered those fateful words while dying in his arms. I spent my whole life protecting you, and you were hunting me. Not recrimination or accusation, but simple statement of a paradox resolved through choice and understanding. The tragedy of their initial opposition transformed into the triumph of their eventual alignment. The treatment deployment, Arlen said after a moment of silence that acknowledged the weight of her words. It's just the beginning, isn't it, of something much larger? Yes, Cyane agreed. If the protocols prove effective, Haven will need to establish distribution networks, protection for medical teams, secure routes through contested territories. a complex logistical challenge requiring both Sentinel capabilities and human cooperation. A purpose worth pursuing. Arlen noted the phrase deliberately echoing her own value system. Indeed, the faintest smile touched Cyane's blue lips. For both of us, I think. As darkness settled over the wasteland, they remained on the observation platform, the blue-skinned Sentinel, and the human she had protected across decades now, standing side by side as equals. Before them stretched a future uncertain in its details, but clear in its direction, a shared purpose that honored both their natures, while transcending the limitations of each. The hunter and the hunted now united as guardians of a fragile hope for a world that had forgotten the meaning of the word.